good to go.
All right, back to you, Madam Chair.
Okay, welcome back to the afternoon part of the work session for March 9th, 2021. This is Catherine Harrington, Chair of the Washington County Board of Commissioners. We also have Commissioner Pam Treese, Commissioner Jerry Willey, Commissioner Nafisa Fai, and Commissioner Roy Rogers. The first item on the afternoon agenda is Audit Committee bylaws. Mr. Leung.
Good afternoon, Chair Harrington. Good afternoon, Commissioners. Thank you very much for your time today. And I'm in front of you to present a draft for the Washington County Audit Committee bylaw. As you may be aware that the Audit Committee has been in existence for quite some time at Washington County, but this actually is the first draft bylaw that we are establishing as part of our continued formalizing our boards and commissions process within the county. And this bylaw is mostly drafted based on current practices with the input from internal staff from finance, as well as the Office of Equity, Inclusion, and Community Engagement. And we also incorporated input from our external auditors, as well as best practices from the Government Finance Officers Association. And for the most part, the draft bylaw is very similar to our current practice at the county on the audit committee processes. The only thing that changes from our current practice is the member count. We always have had 5 members for the audit committee, and then following comment from the previous work session discussion, we are increasing the member count to up to 9. So basically, the bylaw is drafted in a way to say that the member can compromise not less than 5 and not more than 9 to offer the flexibility to bring in additional members if we do have a more interest to serve on this particular committee. And that's the only material thing that is different from our current practice. The current bylaw as it's drafted has 5 sections. It includes the purpose section, the composition and terms of audit committee section, the meetings section, responsibilities of the committee, as well as limitation to the committee's roles. And we also received one offline email comment from Commissioner Rogers about the notion in there that says that seems to may build a perception that only significant matters will be communicated to the audit committee. And we have since proposed update to remove the notion of significant and really open the flexibility for any matters that the auditors deem important or noteworthy to discuss with the audit committee to be included. So it's a very minor update. It's just removing the wording significant from the draft. And that, as I was explaining, this is built upon best practices, and we have also shared the draft with all the committee members and have received no concerns or feedback from the audit committee members either. So with that, with a short staff report, I'd be happy to answer any of your questions or receive any of your feedbacks on this draft.
Yeah, Jack, just I read through this. If you could in the future provide us with a red line edition so I know what changes were made on that. So because I didn't have anything to compare it to, but I'm fine with this. So yeah.
Everything is redlined because this is the first version.
It's a brand new bylaw for the audit committee. Yes. Commissioner Willie, you might be muted.
You are.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I thought we had a previous one that we were using
Not
the stupid term drafting off of for the draft, but so I didn't understand that. So I'm sorry. Yes,
okay.
No, okay. I read it. It's
We're
fine.
all just getting on the same page. It's okay. This is how we help one another. Any other commissioner questions or comments? Okay, well, I'll dive in. I just have a few items, one in section 2 and a couple in section 4. So in section 2, composition and terms of audit committee. So the board member is an appointee. And then in the last sentence, all appointees to the committee shall be knowledgeable in accounting and auditing practices as demonstrated by personal or professional experience in auditing, accounting, or finance. It's kind of exclusionary. I don't know if I qualify as having professional experience by virtue of my prior public government experience with budgets. But if we have a brand new commissioner who's, well, actually we do, who's not served in an elected capacity before, I want that board member, I'm just talking in general terms, I want any new board member to have the opportunity of serving. So the desired outcome I'm looking for in support of the very first sentence should be comprised of no less than 5 and no more than 9. I want to make sure that we have the opportunity of using the audit committee to bring community members along in getting familiar with the world of public budgeting. So instead of saying all appointees, I was thinking about the phraseology of at least a majority of appointed members. Because if it's at least 5, or it could be that at least 5 of the members have that experience. So I wanted to raise that because, frankly, I think that's too exclusionary. Exclusionary is the word I was looking for. I don't know how other commission members feel about that, if you'd be open to it or not. I do want the audit committee to have experience, but.
Yeah, this is one of those committees that does require an expertise that's above and beyond the norm. And so for me, if I sat on this committee as a CPA and there was 5 people with the professional expertise and 4 that did not, it would be our responsibility to bring them along and educate them. And I can tell you that whenever I am presenting a financial report on some board that I sit on, I'll get a little bit every once in a while. I'll get chastised because they'll all say, "You're trying to make us accountants, and we're not accountants. Just dumb this thing down." Well, we don't want that in our budget committees. And so I think it's more important actually that we do have this expertise. Maybe we could broaden the definition a little bit, but I'm not willing to just say a simple majority have that expertise, because I think it's really, really important that we have the right people in the right place. So that's my comment.
So I think at least 4 members in the case of 5, I think, so not counting the board member, I agree that we do need that professional experience. But I think we're kidding ourselves to say that we're supporting equity and inclusion as a county when we're defining this committee in such a narrow way. And I can say, after 1 year serving on the Metro Council, I was appointed to, or it may have been my first year, I was appointed to the audit committee, right? But I served on a committee with a majority of experienced professional auditors, right? And I would check in with the chair and some of the other colleagues and say, am I asking useful questions? Do I understand this right? So I think we do want to use this as a feeder for our bigger committees. Frankly, serving on the audit committee isn't that hard. You know, we have professional auditors to understand all the forming GASB rules and whatnot. That's not our role as commissioners. Making sure that the audit committee does its work, that it's understood, is definitely part of our experience. So I'm just asking that go back and take a look, work with our community engagement team, and come up with something that is less exclusionary. So.
I'm still, oh, I'm sorry, I'm still eating, but I'd make a couple of comments. Jerry, you're pretty much spot on, not to disagree with the chair, but there are some committees that are very technical. And as far as equity, I have not seen that anyone who was of any color would be excluded. There's CPAs from every race, creed, and nation that end up dealing with these. You're dealing with GASB, you're dealing with OMS, which is Oregon Minimum Standards, you're dealing with single audit issues, you're dealing with ERISA rules, you're dealing with a whole lot of things that if it takes a lot of training to understand that stuff. And if it's just simply a feeder, and I know that wasn't pretended to be just a feeder, it's different than a budget committee. Budget committees are very important in terms of dealing with the actual dollars. This is to say, did you perform your activities in a correct way? And I appreciate, Jack, you putting in the word, taking out the word significant. Under auditor vernacular, that has a very defined definition. And there are things that are important, for instance, of what we call a SOAP schedule or a statement of adjustments passed, that they may not consider material enough or significant enough to report. But if there were 85 items, I'd be asking a question. I was asked about that. So how many corrections are being made? Because it shows that the staff is not performing correctly. Also, in regard to AJEs, adjusting journal entries, how many are there? What's the nature of them? Again, it may not rise to the area of significance or material, but it's important to understand how the functioning of the staff is. So it depends on what you look at it as. If this is a training ground or if this is something to monitor how the audit process is, that's certainly something you can do. That doesn't get to the question, are they considering all current future GASBs, will they be applying them correctly? And if you say, well, isn't an auditor supposed to do that? Yeah, but in all technical fields, there's a bit of variance on how you interpret and how it's going to impact, what's the cost impact on the organization. So yeah, I don't think it's bad to have people who maybe not have all the professional training, but they should have a majority by far. And then you should determine, do you want this committee very differently to learn about the audit stuff? You can sit there for 2-3 years. I mean, you go to 4 years, 5 years of college now, and then you have to have training. Can you teach somebody that in 2 meetings or a meeting or two? It's just a very, very different committee. So that's my input. I'll go back to eating lunch.
May I offer a suggestion for your board's consideration? It's normally in our recruitment for the audit committee, the applicants that usually show an interest or put in an application, usually they do have a certain degree of a professional background or in really auditing matters. Normally we don't really have an issue recruiting for community members that has sufficient background to serve on audit committee. But Chair Harrington does bring up a really good point that we may or may not have that particular expertise on the mix of the Board of Commissioners. Would it be acceptable if we were to revise that last sentence to only subject that particular requirement to the community member while we're recruiting? Because usually we would not have a problem finding community members with EDI background as well as auditing and finance professional background to meet that requirement. If we were to clarify, if we were to exclude the board rep on the committee from that particular requirement, would that be an acceptable revision to the draft?
Tell me which paragraph you are referring to, Jack. I'm trying to scroll down to it and I'm not seeing specifically which one it is.
I think Chair Harrington is referring to section 2, the first paragraph and the last sentence of the first paragraph.
Section 2, okay, just a second. And so I'm sorry now, okay, I'm looking at it. What are you proposing?
So the issue that Chair Harrington raised is that if we get too rigid in terms of requiring the knowledgeable in accounting and auditing practice as demonstrated by personal or professional experience in auditing, accounting, or finance. It may be too exclusive, and it may really cause an issue for a board representative to be quote unquote qualified or to serve on this committee. And I do agree with that issue wholeheartedly. And I do feel on the audit committee, the board representative's role is slightly different than the community members' role. The board representative is also there, like Commissioner Roger explains, to ensure that the audit committee is functioning to the board's intention and to ensure that good conversations and the good questions are being asked during that time. So I can see a case being made that that particular expertise may not necessarily have to be held by a board representative, as Chair Harrington explained, as long as the majority of the committee member have that expertise. So I was proposing to revise the language to exclude that requirement for the board representative on that. As I was really thinking practicality is when we recruit for this committee, normally we don't run into applicants that do not have at least some background in these areas. So I don't think the result would be exclusionary to the community members, actually.
So that's the one member that you're talking about.
Correct. One of the 5 or 9 would be the board representative.
And that person wouldn't have to have the professional expertise, but if you had 9 people on the committee, 8 of them would, and 1 of them would be appointed by the board. Is that what you're saying?
Correct.
So there'd be 8 with the expertise.
Right.
I'm okay with that.
Chair Harrington, you're still muted.
Thank you. If someone wants to apply, on our website, the membership description is 5 members who are knowledgeable of accounting and auditing as demonstrated by professional employment in accounting, auditing, or finance, including 1 appointee from the membership of the Board of County Commissioners. So the reason why we're not seeing people who don't have that professional experience is because we require it. So I just wanted to make sure that we still have the board member and at least the 4 professional members that describes, but we talked about increasing the membership of this, still wanting to maintain that professional experience, but also provide the opportunity for other members of our community. And I'm fine with just members of the community who want to build their knowledge base in public finance and accounting. So, but that's all. I'll move on to section 4.
Could I ask a question here? And I'm sorry if I'm dense, but what I want to understand is we're talking about the audit committee from 5 to 9 people, and no matter what the makeup is, one of those people is one of those seats is appointed by the Board of Commissioners. So it doesn't matter if there's 9 people or if there's only 5, it's still just 1 seat. Okay, thank you.
So section 4, responsibilities.
I'm sorry, I didn't say I can support what Catherine's saying for that seat. So I'm sorry, I didn't make that last clear. I'm Catherine supporting your comment about the the section 2.
Yeah. Frankly, it doesn't sound like it's going to go anywhere, so it doesn't matter. Thank you, though. I do appreciate it. In section 4, responsibilities, paragraph 2. On the 4th line, the audit committee shall satisfy itself that the audit will meet the needs of the BCC, the citizens of the county, and other users of the CAFR. I thought the best practice in community engagement was to stop using the word citizen and use the phrase committee member. So here I sit with a final draft from staff, vetted by staff, commenting on that. Third paragraph, last sentence. The last line, audit committee shall notify the board chairperson. Per our charter, the chair is the chair. No chairwoman, no chairman, no chairperson. Chair. Those are my comments.
Yes, we will make those 2 revisions in the draft that will be coming to your board.
Yeah, I would, instead of citizens, don't we usually use the word residents or members of the community, something like that? I don't know. That's what I was tried to be educated on, so I'm okay. Constituents, something like that.
I'm okay with the amendments. The only thing I'd tell you, Jack, is I just got notification today from the GFOA that we're not supposed to use the term CAFR anymore. That's going to change. So you might take a look, and always changes.
We'll take a look at the new rules.
Okay.
So were there any other board questions or comments? There you go.
Thank you. Just to wrap up, we will make the suggested revisions, and then back to Chair Harrington's comment about trying to widen the application pool from the committee. We'll take a look at the language and see if there's anything we can tweak to encourage additional participations from the community. And actually, Commissioner Rogers did make another comment offline about supporting an info session for new committee members that may be a little bit less experienced in the public financial reporting realm, and we will look into that from the staff level as well, just to help community members to be even more in tune with the audit committee, and then be more inclined to participate on that one. Thank you very much.
So Ms. Angie, if I could ask a clarifying question on that. As far as I know, that option is an option for the staff liaison that runs all these committees and can pertain to every committee. It doesn't have to be captured in the bylaws, right?
Correct.
Okay. Got it. Okay. Well, thank you, Jack. Next, we'll move on to item 7, strategic facilities planning and courthouse planning update.
Good afternoon, Chair Harrington, Board of Commissioners. I'm joined with Jack and Aaron. This is an update on our strategic facilities planning process, as well as a courthouse planning update. These are 2 board identified priorities, and so we wanted to update you where we are in the process and get some feedback today. So first, Jack will walk us through the strategic facilities plan, and then Aaron will walk through the courthouse planning.
Thank you, Tanya. If we can, yeah, thank you. This slide is right. So first of all, I want to provide a little bit brief history and on our journey of the strategic facility planning process. So back in 2019, the need for a strategic facility planning process was communicated to the Board of County Commissioners at a work session, and then we have received some really good feedback from the board from that work session. And then starting in 2020, that's following that work session, we have met with each commissioner and worked with the county administrative office to continue to refine the project goal. And then really what we're trying to, the outcomes and the process, really what we're trying to get out of this process. And then we also did a follow-up presentation at the Board of County Commissioners work session after this refinement, and really narrowed down to a set of project goals. And then right after that, that last work session was actually in March of 2020. And then right after that, we got into COVID response mode, and then really were delayed by an entire 9 months in that process. Next slide, please. So back in that March 2020 work session, these are the set of information we brought back to the board after receiving the feedback from each commissioner, from the county staff, from county administrative office. So it really boiled down to a couple of these bullet points, is that we envisioned the county's building requirement for the next 50 years of usage. Although that obviously we envision the project will be on a shorter timeline for this time, but really when we look at new facility investments, it's looking to the next 50 years of usage by the county. And then we also determined the long-term service delivery needs for each department, and the service access needs for the constituent customers are at the core of what we're doing here. It's really to envision service delivery, and then what would be the right kind of facilities to wrap around that to support it. And then provide directions for the county-wide capital master plan and a funding strategy for this capital master plans. So please note that this capital master plan has a plural on it. So what we envision is after this strategic facility planning process, we actually would have an inventory or a list on different capital master plans for us to proceed forward with. And then as far as the value of this whole process, we have boiled down to the 7 values that's at the bottom of this slide over here, which reflects the county's values that has been discussed in the realm of facilities management. It's really customer-centric, employer of choice, acting inclusion, security and safety, smart building designs, as well as sustainability and trauma-informed considerations in this planning process. Next slide, please. So we have made some recent progress. After the 9 months delay, we were able to restart some work in January of 2021. That's where we're getting a little bit of relief from the ongoing COVID response, and then facilities and park services division were able to resume some of this work. First of all, we did a status briefing to the new county administrator, Tanya Angie, and then really gotten her input as well as her directions on the rest of the work. And then we have an internal communications and engagement plan that was drafted. This is an internal plan which primarily focused on departmental communications as well as engaging internal stakeholders. Once we have the consultant on board, we would definitely draft an external communication plan to engage the community as well. And then we also engaged with the Office of Equity, Inclusion and Community Engagement to further refine the RFP to ensure that we have enough equity considerations, enough diversity considerations built into the request for proposal document itself. And then back into February 2021, which is just this last month, we were able to draft a project governance model, as well as we launched the RFP to be available to the public, to the vendor community to send in their proposals. The RFP evaluation committee members were selected, and then orientation was also held at the time. And then we have the RFP is planning to close on March 17th at 4 p.m. And then we have a pre-proposal meeting that was held on March 2nd. And then we have a great interest so far. We got 40 plus followers on the RFP. We're very excited to see how many of them turn into actual proposals that submitted to us. Next slide, please. I wanted to chat a little bit about the timeline. And as you can see that this tentative project timeline only carries us from January of 2021 to July of 2021. So this entails a few key action items on here. And then the first one on here is the development of the internal plan for communication engagement. That part is complete. And then finalize and launch RFP, that part is also complete. So the next step along the way is to engage and mobilize county and departmental leadership, as well as review the proposals once the RFP closes. And then we have the onboarding consultant that's tentatively targeted for July, because we imagine that the rest of the RFP review process, the contracting process will carry us into June. So a couple key dot points, key milestones that's built into this phase of the project is the launch of the RFP on February 16th, the RFP proposals due, which is March 17th, and then the Board of County commissioner approval of the consulting firm, it's scheduled for June 1st. And then finalized contract with consultant is scheduled for June 6th. The reason that we didn't build out the entire rest of the timeline is because that this is a brand new process for the county, and we're really hoping to gauge the rest of the timeline from the proposal that the consulting firm are proposing. This is a fairly new process in the industry, and definitely a brand new process in Washington County. So we don't want to use a tentative timeline that is rigid enough to limit the creativity and flexibility of the RFP, of the proposal that's being proposed by the consultant. So it is our anticipation after the onboarding of the consultant that we will actually build out a full project timeline with the proposal coming from the consultant to bring back to your board as a part of the update. While we didn't build out the second phase of the project, we do have a couple key dates that we will engage with the board. If we can get to the next slide, please.
Jack,
Go ahead,
if you,
Chair.
could go, if you could go back 2 slides.
2 slides. Okay.
Could you just summarize what sort of expertise or why have an RFP? You know, what is it that you're looking for that you already don't have in your facilities team?
Thank you, Chair Harrington. That is an excellent question. First of all, if we look at the strategic facility planning process, it's a new process that has been introduced by the International Financial Management Association, International Facilities Management Association in the last 10 years. So in the grand scheme of things, it's still a fairly new process. It's very innovative, very creative. And as I was explaining, it's something that the county has never done before. We have done quite a few master plans in the past, but if to look at facility planning from a strategic perspective, that is one expertise that we don't feel confident enough to do it in-house by ourselves. And then in addition to that, we do need to engage with a consulting firm as part of the RFP, as part of the project goals that we're hoping is to also incorporate current condition assessment for each one of the county's buildings and facilities. And that is something that the county staff does not have a ongoing existing expertise. We do have a general expertise to assess building and equipment when they needing repair, when they needing maintenance. But from a strategic view on a longer time horizon, we would love to have a external help to provide on that. So those are the two. Yes.
Thank
those
you.
are the 2 key areas. Yes. All right, back to this BCC engagement timeline. We have put this in as a tentative date. We may have a very excellent consulting firm that comes in and draws a different plan. And then if that happens, we will bring an update back to your board. So tentatively today, we're hoping to, as you can see on a later slide with the governance model, we're hoping to have a board liaison for this particular project. And then in June of 2021, we envision a consent agenda will be brought to your board for awarding the contract to the consulting firm. And then in August 2021, we envision to have a project plan updated with a full project timeline, and then introduce the consultant to your board as well. And then November and March 2021, we envision that's basically a tentative timeline for 2 iterations of project progress update back to your board. And then we have a July 2022, which we're hoping that will be the timeline where we get the consultant's findings and recommendation finalized by then. And then August 2022 is when we envision to bring a strategic facility plan, which is a part of the end result of this project, back to your board for adoption, and then as well as a capital investment strategy. And then that's when we will launch the remaining of the process, which begins the creating of the various master plans that may arise from this effort. So those are just at a high level tentative board engagement timeline that we envision. And of course, depending on the Board of County Commissioners' interest, we can either do more frequent update or less frequent update. And again, it's all with the goal of keeping your board continued to be informed and engaged on this very important project. Is there any questions? I will pause here. Is there any questions on the board engagement piece? Okay, hearing no questions, we'll go to the next slide.
Jack, just what, oh, okay.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, no, I'm
Go ahead,
sorry.
Commissioner.
Couldn't get it over there fast enough to get it off unmute. Yeah, and this isn't my expertise at all, but I was just reading an article early this morning about it's a study, and I wish I could get my hands on it. It had to do with numbers of people who are going to be working remotely, and even after the pandemic ceases to exist, bunches of folks don't want to come back on a regular time. And they were projecting as well that it's not just in government facilities, but on the private side, and what downtowns were going to look like and how people can consolidate space. So in the facilities plan, have you, I thought it was a great question of the chair in regard to why we need consultants at this stage. Have we really thought this through and said 40 years from now, we'll have 8 people in a building and the rest will be sharing a conference room from time to time because everybody's working at home. Have we really looked at what we need, or are we spending a bunch of money to plan out something that we might not ever use? I mean, it's fascinating when you start reading what the trends are, not looking at traditionally what we do, but what might happen.
Thank you, Commissioner Rogers. That is an excellent comment, and that is actually at the core of the reason why we're going through this effort, is to assess what the future looks like, is to actually bring all the departments together, bring the community members together, and really envision Washington County service in 50 years' time. What you brought up is definitely going to be a very core consideration when it comes to facilities planning about, is our service going to continue to be in office or in-person kind of setting? Or if it is in office, in person, is it going to be in the downtown core of Hillsborough, or is it better served in other areas in the county? So all of those questions will be assessed in this process and then will be asked during this time. And that's actually, just to add in a side note, is one of the considerations, because we were actually questioning ourselves during the pandemic back in 2020 to say, should we continue to press on with this effort, or should we wait a little bit and let COVID settle out a little bit before we can see a little more of what would the new normal looks like? So our decision at the time is to say, things are so busy, but also so uncertain at the time. We thought that it would serve the county well to wait a little bit until that we are kind of on the tail end of COVID response and to be able to assess that. So from the rest of support services, we're actually hearing the comments from the departments about the future of remote working, the future of office work. So this is actually, from a timing perspective, I think it's a great timing for us to start that conversation and then really get all the departments' input on what their future service delivery looks like. So thank you for your comment. All right, seeing no other questions. And by the way, with this view that I'm seeing here, I don't see all commissioners on one screen with the presentation. So please feel free to interrupt me anytime. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to chat a little bit about the communications and engagement plan. And I'd like to remind you that this is only the internal part of the communications and engagement plan at this moment. And we have 3 major goals in there. Basically, one is to build an effective and flexible project governance model while leaving space for the consulting firm to propose an input solicitation process. And then 2 is that we want to identify diverse voices and the futuristic thinkers from every department and office to contribute to this effort. And then lastly, we want to brainstorm sessions to facilitate future service delivery visions and innovative ideas. So it really ties into what Commissioner Roger was saying, is our service delivery model will most likely look very different from how it is today, from a location, from a space planning, from a EDI perspective. All those values that we listed is going to shape part of the difference into our service delivery model. Next slide, please. So this is the project governance model that we are coming up with. We have basically 4 committees that's in the project governance model. The first one is the Executive Leadership Committee. The role of this particular committee is to advise and oversee the process of the project. And that committee consists of County Administrator Tanya Angie, the Assistant and Deputy County Administrators Aaron Calver, Sia Lindstorm, and Ruth Osuna, and then also our Chief Equity and Inclusion Officer, Latricia Tillman, myself as the project sponsor on there, and then also we would like to get Board of County Commissioners liaison on the Executive Leadership Committee as well. The next committee is the steering committee, and then this committee does its work is to guide processes and ensure project stays on track. And then this committee is internal to Support Services, Facility and Park Services Division, and that consists of Martin Granham, Missy Hughes, Basan Khalifi, and Jack Liang. And then the next one is the User Input and Process Committee, which is from the departments. And this committee is actually quote unquote a departmental leadership committee or departmental decision-making committee. This is where the department actually have the responsibilities to hold brainstorming sessions, to select their members for the next committee, which is called the Leaders of Tomorrow Committee. And then what we're requesting from departments are 2 representatives from each department. And we're suggesting 1 representative from leadership position and then 1 representative from staff position. So we get good diversified view on this User Input and Process Committee. And then the last committee that we want to put in there is the Leaders of Tomorrow Committee. This is a committee that will help us brainstorm ideas and needs and analysis for the project. And the focus of this is really the futuristic thinking. So what we want to gauge are the group of employees that will really be using the county facilities to conduct the service deliveries in the next 20, 30, 40, 50-year horizon. So we're hoping really to engage a younger crowd in each department, and then really get the ideas from the really the younger generation of workforce on their ideas of what the workplace looks like in the future. So that is the 4-part project governance model. Next slide, please. So that leads me to my question today is, first of all, is the board interested in nominating a liaison to serve on our executive leadership committee? And if that is, who would the board nominate for that? And then the next question is, how would the whole board like to be informed and engaged on a regular basis? So with that, I will open up to any questions or comments.
Commissioners, thoughts? It looks like we lost Commissioner Rogers again.
I think it's really cool that you're looking to the future and that you are reaching into areas that, I don't know that we've reached into so much before with younger people and thinking about the workforce of tomorrow. That's so important and really a good idea. So thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Chief.
Yeah, I'll just I'd tag on to that. That's quite a governance group that you have there, but it is pretty broad, and I think it's going to be very cool. I mean, this is going to be an expensive building, but a very necessary addition to certainly the services that we provide. So I think that's great. As far as how would I like to be informed and engaged on a regular, I guess just keep us up to speed at maybe when you hit critical junctures or when you hit a point where you need to maybe either have direction or approve of some of the brainstorming ideas that you come up with. I mean, I don't feel like I need to be informed every month, but every couple months or something like that. I mean, at critical junctures, that would be just fine with me. But this is a great plan, I think, Jack. Good job on this.
Thank you, Commissioner Willie.
Commissioner Fye?
I feel like, Jack, you thought about all the angles of this project. I'm also impressed and appreciate this well thought out. For me, I think I would go with the suggestion Jerry suggested in terms of involvement. I think critical points of the project and how you can loop us in, I would greatly appreciate it. I don't know, maybe that's every 2 months, every 3 months, whatever you think it's a best fit.
Thank you, Commissioner Fye. Just a quick comment about your comment is most of the work is actually done by staff in Facilities and Park Services Division. I'm very proud of the staff. So I'm really the messenger of to carry forward the plan, but there were a lot of very good staff thought process and work that's been done in Support Services FPS, as well as our partners in various offices, including the Office of Equity, Inclusion, and Community Engagement. Thank you very much for your comment.
Commissioner Rogers, anything else?
I don't think so. Thanks, Jack. I don't know what the updates would be. Whether it's 6 months or every 2 or 3 months, but I do understand that you've got a whole body of work you've got to do, and I'm always saying we can't talk about old people, young people, or anything, but I guess I'll make a deviation from my remarks and say that I think it is important to talk to people who are probably pretty young and tech savvy who understand what they're going to need in terms of a long time career. And so I certainly encourage you to get that whole body of work thought out long before you brief us, and figure out what is it going to look like when the office of the future is your backpack with a computer in it, and you can sit in the park bench and do work all day. I mean, we don't know what it's going to look like, and I certainly encourage you to do that. So anyway, good work to your team.
Thank you, Commissioner Rogers.
Okay, well, I'll round out the comments. I seem to recall that we brainstormed some ideas as a board in terms of what we might be looking for, but I don't have my fingers on it. So at the risk of being redundant, in terms of the kind of things that I want to make sure we get is that we're hitting the major needs of the organization. And we've already talked as a board about things like geographic spread of our services, not just based on population, but looking at other needs. I want to make sure that no matter how our facilities are spread out, that those that involve showing up physically somewhere, that they have access to public frequent service transit and aren't out in the hinterlands. So some of what I'm looking for is I'm pleased that you're securing the consultant resources that are needed in order for this to be a true strategic master plan. And then leveraging also the expertise, not only of the Parks and Facilities staff, but also all the different departments and how they envision their strategic services going out multiple decades. I appreciated that on slide 3, you listed ensure facilities reflect the county's values. And I'd be interested to hear from the consultant of how those values will be incorporated or have relevance with the strategy. So really what it boils down to is you're going through the RFP process now, and then you're going to have, as you listed on slide 6, between August of 2021 and July of 2022, there's going to be a big body of work. Commissioner Willie used the phrase critical junctures. Well, it's like, what are those major milestones? So that you know what's going to define that as a strategic master plan, that it is successful, right? And so knowing that up front. And so I think this board will benefit from hearing about what that approach is. Worst case, use the phrase work plan, right? And can identify from that work plan what these touch points are, different than from a time frame standpoint, because some of those phases may take longer, right? They're not all uniform. And also if I think about it from the standpoint of what are some of the qualities you don't want to end up with a strategic master plan at the end where the board goes, what on earth? Or you think we're going to spend those kinds of dollars? Or, so you got to figure out what those milestones are so that not only are we on the journey, but that you're able to hone in on the strategic aspect of that. So it's really, hard to say, how would you like to be informed and engaged on a regular basis when I don't know what the framework is? So I feel like I'm sort of shooting in the dark here, so to speak. The other aspect of it is, remember, we're part of that department set as well. When I was at Metro and we went through a facilities master plan, they forgot to ask the council what our needs are. So it's like, hello, that phrase, nothing for us without us. Well, what do you mean we don't need a conference room? We need rooms all the time to meet, things like that, and just congregating space. So I look forward to that work plan or approach, also figuring out how to survey us or engage us in this. So
Absolutely.
Those are just some thoughts.
Thank you, Chair Harrington. A question to the entire board is, what are your thoughts on a BCC liaison on the Executive Leadership Committee, and would you like to nominate one to help us out on that particular committee?
Jack, question for you. Are you asking that question because you actually need to have a board liaison? Are you asking the question because you don't want us to feel like we're not included? What are you looking for in relationship to a board liaison? May I be so bold?
Oh, thank you, Commissioner Trees. I always appreciate your straight questions. And it's actually both. We feel that the project itself will benefit from a continued board liaison to really guide the project's directions from a executive leadership perspective. And that will help us to ensure that from a board perspective, we always have at least a sounding board, essentially, to ensure that that we're in alignment with the board's value, with the board's vision of the county services into the future. And then from the board's perspective, we feel that it would be beneficial for BCC to have a liaison, and then possibly brought back maybe quote unquote those less formal updates, in the work sessions, and just to keep the board in a way informed in between those more formal work session updates that we will be brought back as a project team. So we feel that it serves, it would serve benefits on both the Board of County Commissioners purpose as well as staff purpose. Now, we are very mindful of the board's out of your availability. So that's why I asked the question is, do you feel that is something that the board is willing to entertain? And obviously, if you feel that it's something that you do support, we would love to have a liaison from the board. Go ahead, Chair Harrington.
So I see the estimated timeline on slide 6. I think it's a little hard for at least me, I won't speak for anybody else, to get my head around understanding what that liaison assignment would involve, because part of it is, right now we still have me as the chair full-time and 4 part-time district commissioners. And we do have some holes in our boards and commissions where we don't have the bandwidth. And I had the benefit of listening a little bit to Commissioner Treese's testimony to the Salary Commission, but I haven't listened to or watched any of the salary commissions. But my sense is it's like, hey, unless, we can't do more on a part-time basis. So it might be a little difficult to answer that question until after we find out what the Salary Commission has decided. Because I know my colleagues on the AOC Legislative Committee and board meeting yesterday heard once again from me, stop asking me or our county to do more, because we have 4 part-time district commissioners and 1 at-large chair. We don't have full-time commissions like many of them. So pushing back a little bit.
Chair Harrington, Board of Commissioners, if I may suggest, given this conversation, staff move forward with the RFP process, getting the consultant on board and determining those milestones, and then reporting back to the board on the milestones as well as board engagement. And at that time, the board can decide if you want a liaison or if you're comfortable with the milestones and communication and engagement as presented. And I saw Commissioner Therese gave a thumbs up to that approach.
I can also say that if the board doesn't have a board liaison, I don't have any more bandwidth to review any more presentations before work sessions. I think I'm tapped out, at least for a bit.
And I'll speak from the project team perspective. We feel confident that as long as we have a good direction from the county administrative office, we still feel very confident to proceed with the progress of the project without a board liaison. And as Ms. Angie explained, that we will always reserve a seat for a board liaison if the board so choose later on in the process to be better connected to the project. All right. Any not hearing any other questions?
I think you have a natural point there, somewhere between June and August for us to sync back up on that, right? You know, when you have the consultant on board and have a project plan sorted out.
Absolutely.
Okay, so then we will turn it over to Erin to give a courthouse planning update.
If we could advance the slide. Good afternoon, Chair Harrington and Board of Commissioners. As we transition to the topic of courthouse planning for a brief and very preliminary conversation with your board. Generally speaking, this isn't so much of a new conversation, but it does seem like a good time to have an intentional discussion on how to hear how the board would like to proceed. Next slide. So the information on this slide may be familiar to those of you that participated in the fall 2020 legislative breakfast. The graphics are intended to lift up the current state of our courthouse relative to space and workload. So the Washington County Courthouse was constructed in the beginning of 1928 and it opened in 1930, almost 90 or more than 90 years ago. And in fact, when it first opened, Washington County's population was just 30,000 residents. We've really grown. We know that our circuit court is understaffed and that gap for personnel continues to grow as case filings increase and the space for FTE becomes critical. Between 2017 and 19, the National Center for State Courts did an assessment on judge and staff workload. And so from left to right on the slide, you can see what the graphics show us. We have 15 circuit court judges, and based on that assessment, respective to workload, we should have 21. Based on over 29,000 cases filed in Washington County in 2019, that equated to over 1,900 cases per judge in Washington County compared to about 1,500 per judge in Marion and Lane counties. And additionally, when the assessment was reviewed, the staff workload, they reviewed the staff workload for the 5 metropolitan counties. Washington County had about 9% of the workload, and based on that should have had about 120 FTE, but actually only had 97. So that 23.7% difference, as you can see, is significant when it's compared to the other 4 counties in the assessment. Next slide, please. So given the workload and space needs, it is a good time to start thinking about what a modern courthouse could look like. It seems like a pretty obvious understatement to say it could be a large undertaking, but the potential opportunity to approach public safety and justice system as a whole in partnership with the stakeholders as well as the community is an exciting way to design and plan for the future. In thinking about this opportunity, the plans could include co-location of services that assist crime victims, survivors, or those that may become justice involved. It may also include community gathering spaces and classrooms to increase access to justice and hold space for attorneys and others from historically underrepresented communities. And as Jack mentioned in his strategic facilities update, it will be really important to approach this project with an equity-centered lens and a trauma-informed lens in the design and creation of spaces that serve our community. Next slide. So this slide captures some of the elements of a planning process. It's certainly not an exhaustive list. It will be important to reassess the criminal justice master plan with all of the justice partners to review the system-wide goals. In 2008, the county conducted a criminal justice master plan that seemed a little bit more centered on jail and community corrections expansion services and programming. And we're trying to find those documents. I have some floating around, but I'm gathering all of those so that we can pass those on to the board. It really goes into like I said, the detail more around the jail expansion, but there is some information in there on the criminal justice system and the impact from that continuum. The planning would need to include an engagement strategy with the community. We'd need to work on forecasting the court's needs into the future. And we would need to conduct a space planning process for the courts to determine their requirements with an eye toward building efficiency and effective spaces. In 2013, the seismic analysis found that the courthouse is structurally sound, but it doesn't meet the current seismic standards and that it wouldn't be habitable if a large earthquake occurred. So critical here is the discussion around a courthouse remodel or the retrofit and or replacement, excuse me. Next slide. There is a bond program created by the Oregon State Department of Justice and Department of Administrative Services. And this funding is only eligible for courthouse replacements, not the remodels or the retrofits. It could cover up to 50% of a courthouse project. Some of the elements that process would require, though, is a formal analysis showing that the current courthouse does have significant structural defects, which threatens human health and safety, and that the replacement of the courthouse would be more cost-effective than remodeling, and that we'd have to create an opportunity for co-location of other state offices. Next slide. So the key policy question today is whether your board would like to start a courthouse planning process. And if yes, would the board want to hire a program manager? We believe a position dedicated to the entire planning process would be integral to the success given the current capacity and workload. We also believe if this was the direction of the board, that other county planning project needs could fit into this position, moving beyond the courthouse into the future. And so lastly of note, if your board did want to head in this direction, this discussion really is just the plan for the plan, if you will, and that the criminal master planning process will come back to the board for input, planning, and approval, much like Jack just presented. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions or take comments.
Commissioners? Commissioner Willie?
Well, I think I think this is a process, obviously, that needs to get started. I think we lost 2020 in this whole planning process as far as even considering this. So I think we need to move ahead on it. This is a critical part, I think, of our service platform that is woefully deficient right now. So I think we go ahead and hire a program manager. I'd like to see kind of a budget a little bit for that, but yeah, I'm supportive of doing that.
Any other thoughts?
I agree with Commissioner Willie. It just causes me to take a huge deep breath, just like everybody else around this Zoom call or table or whatever we want to call it. It's such a huge undertaking, but when you look at those numbers and the disparity between, the judges and what we need to have, and I don't believe this commission can kick this down the road and much further. So I'm concerned about that, and I'm concerned about what it is that our community needs are. And I think we have to make sure that we address this issue. But it is with a deep breath and with the understanding of what the budget's going to look like, what the opportunities and what the barriers and all those pieces are. So, welcome, Tanya.
Commissioner Rogers?
Will the same process, Aaron, be done as with Jack? I really don't have a good concept of what policing and the judicial system will look like in the future. If we had, for instance, no judges at chambers, and it was simply a process, an electronic process where they're sitting in their office and juries are sitting in a different room, and the incarcerated would be in the jail space. You can imagine all kinds of different, and that's just for folks who are in jail. For those who are on other kind of cases, such as estate issues or domestic relations or a whole host of issues that aren't violent, are those going to be done from the comfort of our homes, and we just simply our attorney's offices, business matters. So are you going to look at what that's going to look like? I hate to just build a huge courthouse with very plush offices that somebody never walks in unless they just want to see everybody else. I mean, hopefully the same thing that Jack was talking about, that is exactly what's going to be done as well.
Yes, thank you, Commissioner Rogers. Great questions and comments. And we've been thinking a lot about that in just what the prior discussion was, right? We've learned so much about remote capabilities. I think the courts might have a little different perspective on some of their capabilities in doing that and rights to being in person and things like that. But the answer to your question is yes, we will look at all of that. I think that's part of that design for the future and for what we know now and projected into the future could be the capabilities. And I don't know if Ms. Angie, if you have anything to add on that.
Yeah, so we were very intentional about coupling this discussion today because they are moving forward in parallel paths. We believe that the consultant that will be working on the facilities strategic master plan will also help inform this process. So working together also, Jack has been a clear partner in this planning effort because we don't want to duplicate efforts. We want to maximize the consultant that will be on the facilities master plan to be helping inform this planning process. We do feel, and we really looked at our staff resources, that we do need an additional FTE. In addition to the budget, we'll have some specialized, probably consultant time as well. We're still finalizing what that would look like. Of course, this request, what we're looking for today is just a nod of the direction of the board. This would be part of the proposed budget, and of course, up to board consideration at that point in time.
Commissioner Fye?
Thank you, Chair. I do support these next steps recommendations. I think it makes sense to hire if we need to. I think my only comment is, this goes back to workforce development or the question that was asked earlier, I think during Jack's discussion. Do we actually need to hire a program manager, or could we look into upward mobility for our own staff and then bring in a maybe part-time consultant or part-time program manager? So just suggestion around giving the opportunity for internal staff to step up. I have a question for you, Aaron. Will this courthouse master planning process include addressing the understaffed and the shortage of judges, or will it just strictly be program design and development for an actual building?
We're more, so the legislature has to decide on the judges. And so I think that's kind of a parallel process that the court staff, Oregon Judicial Department is talking about the need. At the same time, we have to have space for them. So I think it's both. And I think we'd have to work in partnership with all of the stakeholders in that space.
Right. Thank you.
What I've been told is that the state said no more judges until you have more courtrooms.
Okay, yeah, that and I think that's true. That's sort of what we come up against. You know, they look at the numbers of cases, the cases per judges that we just said, and then there's nowhere to put them. So yes.
And if I can add on to that, that's also why not waiting for this process or starting this process at the same time we're starting the facilities master plan process, because of that, I'll call it the lag or the chicken and egg with the courtrooms to judges ratio.
Now, I don't know if what I'm passing on is just urban legend or third hand become fourth hand become fifth hand. But it's what I heard when we had our breakfast meeting in December of 2019, and then the virtual one in 2020.
So Chair, that's
Yeah.
the same information I've heard, and I've also heard that from our GR team as well.
Yep. Okay, so I'll round out the set. It seems very prudent to hire or have a program manager come on board to get going on this planning process at the same time as the strategic facilities master plan. I sure hope that the RFP for the strategic facilities master plan includes this, so that we don't have respondents coming back and trying to renegotiate on that. But that's why you do what you do versus us, right? There are just a couple of things that I wanted to mention, going back to slide 11. I'd like overview-wise at some point to understand, so how many courtrooms do each of those counties have? So I'd like to understand that. Multnomah County just finished a new courthouse within the last year and a half or two. Lane County just went out again for another bond on theirs. I think Clackamas County is making the pitch now, and I don't know how old the Marion County one is. So just a few basic facts would just be helpful to me in the upcoming time. The other thing I'm wondering about is there are courtrooms, but I heard a mention during the last year about how the number of rooms that are used for juries is now different than in the past. And I don't know if that's because of COVID protocols and having the number of people in the room, or if it's just best known practices for managing a jury pool. So that's another basic fact that early in the project will help me feel grounded. Then on your next slide 12, the third bullet, what might it look like to build a courthouse for the 21st century? I'd really love part of the research to look at what the Multnomah County planning process went through, because they had a very extensive community-based program on that with all kinds of stakeholders. And one thing that I want to mention that I will hear from a certain collection of folks in our community if the list of things to look into, well, I need it to look into having public defender support co-location workroom space in such a facility as well. And that just didn't come through in these two sub bullets for me. not enough that it's for judges and staff and prosecutors. We need to make sure, especially not only all defenders, but especially the public defenders.
Absolutely. Thank you.
So yeah, that it seems like a prudent plan to get moving on this.
Okay, great. I've taken notes, and the next time I'll make sure that information comes back to your board with a little bit more detail and comparators. All good information, and still looking to get into a little bit more of the criminal justice master plan from several years ago, just to use that as an anchor as well to move forward. So thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Topic number 8, and then we'll take a break. Or should we take one now? Because this is an hour-long topic, and it's well, we only started at 1:20, so let's keep going. Emergency communications bond financial update, and with our very own Jack Leong and Aaron Calvert.
Thank you again. Yes, still me. Good afternoon, Chair Harrington, Board of Commissioners. For the record, I'm Erin Calvert with the County Administrative Office, and I am joined by Jack Leong, Director of Support Services, Chief Financial Officer. So you'll recall we were last before the board on December 8th of 2020 for a topic that we called the Washington County Consolidated Communications Agency, or WACA, update. And after thinking about the full scope of this project, we've retitled the topic to Emergency Communications Bond Financial Update. Also at the December 8th presentation, Jack and I provided some project information, but we asked your board for more time to reconcile numbers and to understand more about a process that began long before most of us were in our current seats. Next slide, please. So today we are going to provide an emergency communications bond financial update that will be inclusive of the projects that it entails. We'll include the history as we were able to piece it together, and we'll bring transparency and continuous improvement to the process. We will review some major milestones in the timeline and provide a budget report and a funding gap. We'll present potential options for board direction as well. We do recognize this may need to be a part 1 of 2 presentation if your board wants or needs more time to give direction at a subsequent work session. Next slide. So in 2016, the voters approved a $77 million general obligation bond, and as part of the measure, the bond encompassed 5 project areas: to convert the existing 911 system to current technology, to improve countywide radio coverage by installing more towers, to strengthen facilities to withstand emergencies, to expand the 911 dispatch center and expand or add other county emergency response facilities, and to replace approximately 3,000 analog radios that were currently being used by responders. Next slide. Those 5 project areas fit into the following 3 projects. So in summary, the emergency communications system, or the infrastructure, would upgrade the current towers and construct new tower sites. It would upgrade the microwave systems, creating more pathways for communication capability, and update the radios, which would provide resiliency and redundancy in the system. And the budget for the emergency communications system is $64.1 million. The second project area is the capital construction, the idea to build a facility that can withstand emergencies and support the needs of a growing county. And the project is underway. It's about 50% toward completion, and that budget is $26 million. And then the third project area was the purchase of the Blanton property. At the time, there was thought or discussion to expand county emergency response facilities and potentially enhance the public safety service delivery in the eastern unincorporated area of Washington County. This property was purchased for $8.5 million. $6.5 million came from the general obligation bond and $2 million from the full faith and credit bond. Next slide, please. And so before we jump into the timeline, I want to lead with a few statements that I'm hoping are helpful for the board. Number 1, we are delivering what the voters approved. So all 5 project areas are coming to fruition as they were discussed on the prior slide. And the project teams are working really hard to ensure that this is realized. So this is good news. There is a funding gap, though, to get the project completed. The gap didn't just happen in the last few months. I think given the time frame from design discussion to bond passage to construction to present, it's possible that the full scope and cost of the project wasn't fully realized or planned for. We are all working together and taking open and transparent steps to solve the funding gap. And this includes the staff, the project teams, the WACA executive staff, and of course your board. And there are good partnerships in place for this. We do have operational next steps to work through. And maybe most important, in a move toward continuous improvement, we do have an operational plan for future projects and programs that includes better board communication, approval, oversight, and management. And on this last point, I'll spend a little bit more time on those details later on in the presentation. Next slide. We prepared a timeline of major milestones to help walk us through some of the history, but I want to note I've realized in communication with board members that some of these milestones weren't visible to the board. So some of these did have more of an internal facing discussion, and I'll try to lift those up as we move through this. In May, as noted, May of 2016, the bond passed. In October of 2016, the board approves the purchase of the Pine Farm property. This is, of course, the location of the new facility. In March of 2017, Scott Edwards Architecture, or SEA, submits a design that met the initial budget. And then June of 2017, the board approves the contract to award Scott Edwards Architecture for nearly $1.3 million. And then in November of 2017, the board approves the purchase of the Blanton property for $8.5 million. And this purchase closes in July of 2018. Next slide, please. In early to mid 2018, there were many meetings between the County Administrative Office and the WACA leadership to discuss schematic design. So at issue in these conversations was the size of the facility, or specifically the square feet. There were shared goals of ensuring that WACA would get the building that they needed to be successful into the future, but that was also balanced with the costs associated with building a new facility. And so you can see from the slide that the square feet and budgets were increased and decreased proportionally over time. But really the purpose of this slide is just to illustrate the time that it took. This was nearly 1 year of conversations and design decisions being made. When it finally was ironed out, the cost of $15.4 million for construction was an assumption, was $15.4 million for construction. So one assumption that was made was that the sale of the current Tannisbourne building could help realize the project completion. And what I didn't realize, you can go to the next slide, please. What I didn't realize when I was before the board in December is that that was a lever potentially that we may pull to complete the project. My discussion with your board in December was more about the county ownership of the building and then the final disposition once WACA moved out. So again, in early 2019, the building size was confirmed to be 30,507 square feet. And at that time, the facility budget was mentioned was $24.5 million. And again, I think just the conversation of budget overages that you see on the slide was more of an internal discussion on potentially needing to pull that lever to realize project completion. As noted on June 11th, the board had a work session that documented the budget at $24.8 million. On June 18th of 2019, the board increased the Scott Edwards Architecture contract by almost $400,000 to accommodate the square feet changes, the building change. On September 10th, the board approved the Corp contract for $18.4 million. And Corp was the only bid that was submitted at the time, and it came in about $500,000 over the construction budget. And then in November of 2019, the groundbreaking for the new Pine Farm facility occurred. Next slide. So to recap the capital project budget at $26 million, spent to date, this was at the numbers at the end of January, was $13 million, with a remaining budget of about $12.9 million, including $500,000 in contingency. Next slide. Shifting to the emergency communications project, again, just to focus on the infrastructure, this included upgrades to 11 existing tower and communication sites, the build of 12 additional tower and communication sites, the improvement of the microwave paths to provide better coverage, and the replacement of the radios. And again, this helped to design a communication system for the future, built with resiliency and redundancy for effective coverage. Next slide. This budget is at $64 million. We've spent to date $51 million, leaving approximately $12.8 million with a contingency of $17,000. Next slide. Regarding the Blanton property, the bond supported the addition of the other county emergency response facilities to enhance emergency service delivery in an urban unincorporated area of Washington County. At the time of the purchase, there was discussion of potentially moving the Sheriff's Office East Precinct to the site. However, I don't believe this board has had any decision or direction on the Blanton site other than just acknowledging it being part of the county portfolio. It's currently used as the Tualatin Valley Fire and Rescue temporary fire station. It's also temporarily used by Health and Human Services as part of their administrative building, and also used, as you know, for the emergency management, by emergency management for COVID response. Next slide. So the bottom line, the bond premium, and the estimated interest earnings minus the cost of the bond brings the total resources to $92.2 million. The emergency communication system, the facilities budget, and the Blanton purchase totals a cost of $96.7 million. So this leaves the funding gap of $4.5 million. Next slide. For the funding gap, we have provided some potential options to discuss or for the board to consider. And so going through those, one of them is to sell the WACA Tannisbourne building, the current WACA building. In a recent appraisal, the current market value was assessed at $2.9 million. The Public Safety Local Option Levy provides $175,000 annually to WACA for facility and infrastructure improvements and upgrades. We've discussed this in partnership with WACA to look at redirecting those funds back into the project to fill part of the gap. And so the reason the 6 years and the 11 years are separated on your slide, we have not directed those funds to WACA on the current fiscal year, and we know that the voters approved the levy for the next 5-year cycle. So that total of 6 years would be just over $1 million. In some planning documents, back when WACA, the building was being designed, they were actually taking some of those funds and projecting out 10 years, as this was also a possible lever that could help achieve project completion. And so for that, we did include 11 years, which would bring in the 1.9 million, but clearly that's a whole other levy cycle we would have to go through. And then selling the Blanton site, we could also use the general fund resources to cover any funding gap. And then selling the Blanton site. The reason that we're not recommending that is that the proceeds from that sale would need to go back into repayment of the bond, both the general obligation and the full faith and credit. And then secondly, there's some concern that it wouldn't currently appraise as high given the market conditions. Next slide. And then before we get to questions and discussions, I did want to just revisit the earlier statements of our plans for future bond management. I want to commit and to assure you that regarding the issuance of the bond, that moving forward, there'd be clearly documented purposes and intent of the bond. We would have documented funding sources for repayment and clearly identified project and estimated costs with documentation. And then in terms of the ongoing management of the bond, we'd have a formal bond management committee. The bond financials will be monitored by the Support Services Finance Department on an ongoing basis, and that we would have regularly scheduled reports and status updates to the board as well as the public. And with that, I'm happy to answer, you can go to the next slide, questions and discussion.
Aaron, I'd comment, since I'm the only one left here that it was part of that process. You did a very eloquent job of dancing around the issue of what really happened. And I don't say that in a bad way. I say for you, you were being very polite. Just from a business standpoint, it appears, because I've never seen that summary that you showed, and I can tell you former boards never saw that or never were given that information. So this is a enlightenment for me today as well. A little disappointing to say the least. But the prior boards were not silly enough to deficit spend. That wasn't their motif. If anything, they'd try to put money in their pocket. They were, for other things. They weren't silly enough to make these kinds of choices. So I don't, in regard to your choices, there's really not a good one. I mean, to sit there and spend away our future and needs that we might have, that's not a good idea. To sell the WACA building, I think we had a presentation about it, I don't remember, a couple of months ago or maybe less, about potential uses of that, and there's partners who want to use that for good purposes. And so this is embarrassing to say the least. I'm just being upfront with it. So whether this is done in an executive session or somewhere else, I'd certainly like to understand in more clear terms what exactly happened, because this is not, in my mind, an acceptable situation. And I don't blame any of you, and I certainly don't blame the 4 other board members sitting here, because they walked into it. But I feel I walked into it too. I never got any information. This is all new stuff. So this is not I know everybody else want to be polite. I'll be the unpolite one. This isn't acceptable. It's just not the way you do business.
If it's worth anything, Commissioner Rogers, what you're highlighting is that there are new facts here that you and the prior board didn't necessarily have. So polite or not, I think we have a clear set of facts before us today. As the team has looked into the paper trail after 2017, as far as I can tell, as a board member, you didn't have anything that you were briefed on or to react to until the 3 of us started in 2019. So no worries there. I think based on the facts, we're all in this together, whether we like it or not. So I don't know if there's any comfort there, but you're not alone.
Judy?
Can I also respond to the CARES Northwest and FJC? Commissioner Rogers, just to let you know, Aaron, Jack, and I have met with them and shared this information with them, so they do understand that there's a shortfall. So the conversation that was held last fall, it's a different conversation now, because they understand there's the $4.5 million gap in the budget, and we have been in open communication with the 2 organizations throughout this process.
So yeah, Roy, if I could comment too, I've had the opportunity to spend some time with Jack and Aaron on this. They've done a great job. And so overall, we were pretty blessed to have the bond sell at a premium, have some interest earnings on there. We've got a project that originally started out to be 77 million and is now 96 million. Yes, that's certainly a significant increase in project cost, but I think there's also been some enhancements added to it along the way. And when we all get said and done, we're going to have a great emergency communication system. So if you look at it from that standpoint, the difference between the 96,800,000 to the 92 million, what is that, about a 4% cost overrun? So I guess I'm trying to look at the big total picture here. rather than the progression of where we started and where we finished. And so I'm trying to find some good things about this whole thing. I'm not very happy about the 4.5 million funding gap because I too listened to the organizations that would have loved to have had the old WACA building for their operations. They had a great plan of action there, and that's certainly, the sale of that's going to put a real kink in their process. But from the staff standpoint, I think they've done a really good job of going through this with a fine-tooth comb. So I'm kind of ready to move on, put this to bed, and let's see what we can get done next.
I'd like to make a couple comments. I've had the opportunity to talk at length with Aaron and Jack as well. And I think we've got the financial issues. We've got and Jerry laid out that. But I think that there's another piece here, and it's going to be around the lessons learned when it comes to bond management and how we communicate about that and what our process is going in. I was surprised to learn that this was one of the first bond measures of its size that the county had done. So, I think that I don't know what I thought. I just would have thought that there were other experiences. And after, many of you know, I was the chair of the advisory committee for the Beaverton School District bond in 2014. It was $680 million. And the work that committee put together in terms of asking for an oversight committee, asking for communications back to the public after the bond passed. I assumed that type of work happened in all these events, but I don't think it has. So we've learned the financial piece, and I agree with Commissioner Willie. It's time to say, okay, how do we deal with this? And also we've learned what do we want to do differently about communicating with the public on these issues. So I'm pleased that Tanya has been here and has provided the safety net, so to speak, to our staff to delve into this. You've done a great job of describing what's happened and where we may have stubbed our toe along the line. But I 100% agree with Jerry that it's time to move forward. And the intention is to have this fabulous system in place so that people feel safe and secure. And that's the goal. So thank you for your work. And Roy, I think that we can all work together and own this and move down the road.
Commissioner Fye, welcome to our collective reality.
I don't have any comments or questions, Chair.
Okay, not a problem. Okay. Yeah, I joined the rest of my colleagues in going, wow, okay, there's just over a $4.5 million gap. How do we get on with it, solve it, and move forward from there? I do think, I hear the message loud and clear that, the team is delivering to the voter approved project list and that steps are moving forward for future bond management. That's great. I think that the story that exists in these slides between after page 6, so that in slide 7 and going into May of 2019, there's a story there about how the project management team did its work, particularly between December of 2018 and the first 5 months. So within 6 months, the nature of the project, its square footage changed. Commissioner Willie could give you the percentage much faster than I, and the budget took a sizable jump as well. So there's something about project management both here at Washington County and with project partners that is to be learned from this as well. But I don't, that's outside of my scope of interest. But as we're talking about a strategic facilities master plan and a courthouse and other building facility needs, such as we've already discussed over the last 2 years, it tells me something needs to be different. So I just wanted to mention that. So we have a gap. Well, that stinks. $4.5 million. You say that we'd be fortunate to make 2.9 in selling the Tannisbourne WACA building. And that there is the potential for another 1 million from the public safety levy just over the next 6 years. That leaves us, if you take those two, and we're not going to get, the full 2.9 million on the sale, right? Because there's going to be closing costs probably. So I don't know what a reasonable number is, but we still have a gap that looks like we're going to need to ask our CAO to look at and put into the proposed fiscal year budget. So I think the team has outlined the different steps or the different aspects of the different parts to the option to close the gap. And so they're looking for clear direction. So am I correct in understanding that one possible option for the 4.5 gap is to sell the Tannisbourne to utilize the 6 years of that WACA funding plus some portion of the general fund and close the gap within, I assume this gap has to be closed within some 6 months, 1 year timeframe.
I think that's accurate, Jack, on the closing of the bond.
Correct. So what I would also propose is the reason that we listed 11 years for the WACA portion of the public safety levy is that given the contingency of that next cycle being passed, that could be set up as a general fund loan and then to be repaid from that portion at a later point.
Yeah, the reason that I didn't seize on that as an option is I haven't gone back to look at the public safety levy to see if there are operational needs that funding is directed towards. So I find that option still interesting, but I'm concerned about being that far out in years. Are there some operational needs that will need those dollars? So I think this is just not the final direction, but rather, can you put together a combination and see, because I would imagine you'd want to go back to at least the WACA executive team and find out, can we count on that $1 million+ or is it less than that given operational needs they have over that 6 year time period? I don't know. I think we need to find out.
They have, Chair Harrington, that's a great question. The WACA leadership has agreed to that at this point for the 6 years and even beyond. So they mapped out the 11 with us, knowing that no one has that crystal ball, but yes. And I'm happy to forward the funding agreement. It's pretty broad, no surprise from when it was developed, but I'm happy to send that, that funding agreement to the board.
I think that funding agreement, is it the same one that we had in our June 2019 packet?
It may have been. I wasn't here, so I'd need to look to confirm, but I'm sure that it probably was. Yes.
Yeah, I think it might be. So yeah, do the math. Let us know what it's going to look like for the general fund.
You got it. Thank you.
Karen, a couple of questions I have, and I appreciate that maybe a 4% change isn't a lot. Anyone who does any building understands you're going to have 5, 6, 7% contingency. I get that. I also get that we need to move on. I hear those comments, and I get all that. I have one request for me, just for me, and then I'll make the point. And my request is, I want to see whose responsibility it was with the WACA team. It's a separate organization, and what deals were made, why we got into this. I'd like to see where the architect was on this. Could we hire professional architects? I'd like to see where the finance team was and their estimation of what these costs are. And I'd like to see our own internal folks who are doing the work. It sounds like I'm being a little testy and bitter, but you know, that's the job. We hire people to do the job. So that's my information request. As far as the options, I personally, and I'm going to be different than the rest of the board, I don't like any of them. If I got to step up to the liability, okay, I'd just as soon bond it and get done with it and spread it, because I think it's an awfully big hit to take in this particular year, and we figure out some way to short-term bond it. The markets now are excellent as far as interest rates, easy to sell municipal bonds, and it's kind of like buying a car, a house, and a lot of other things. People, you know, you can't afford, you just take and you get a short-term, or not so short, but a longer-term loan and spread that out so it has some affordability. But I frankly don't like any of the options. That's just me. But I agree that we need to punt that one over to the county administrator, and she can give us some options. But I would hope you'd look at the loan prospect as well, or the bond prospect, see what we can do just to bridge.
Thank you, Commissioner Rogers. On the comments of the things that you'd like to see, I'm happy to, Jack and I can work together in trying to cobble those documents together for you where they are, and then we'll do the same in preparing some of the options as well.
I've tried to not put our staff team on the spot, because this work happened before under a different CAO, under a different assistant county administrator, under a different deputy CAO. And so the players haven't concerned me per se in terms of looking back, but rather what are the learnings to carry forward, both for the bond management as well as for project management. So Commissioner Rogers would like that information, great. It's just not where my head's at.
Mm-hmm.
Any other board information needs, comments, questions? No, I think we're done on that one.
Thank you very much for your time and your patience through all of this. It's appreciated. Thank you.
Well, and thank you for all the due diligence from you folks as well. Yes, Commissioner Treese.
Erin, you mentioned that we might need a part 2. Do you still think we do, or are we okay?
I'm hearing that you might be okay if we can provide just a little bit more detail on the actual budget, the addition of kind of all those strands we talked about. So we'll provide that for you.
Okay, great. I just wanted to come back around on that.
Thank you for that.
I didn't think we did either. Thank you for the presentation, and Jack and Tanya for your leadership on this.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, it's 3:09. We have 3 different topics left on the agenda. So why don't we take our 15-minute break now and come back at 3:25. Okay, see you in a bit. Anybody ready?
Let's wait for the commissioners to come back on the screen, Madam Chair. Commissioner Rogers, Commissioner Pye, Commissioner Willie, Commissioner Treese. Okay. Tanya, are you back with us? And Alan?
Yes.
Commissioner Rogers, are you there?
I'm here.
All righty. Well, we'll move ahead with topic number 9, Major Streets Transportation Improvement Program Overview. Boom, Mr. Roberts.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Commissioners. Glad to be back. We are wanting to just give you kind of an overview of the MSTIP program, and we're doing this as sort of the first in what we envision as a series of briefings over the next year or more as we set out to prioritize funding and programs for an additional round of the Major Streets Transportation Improvement Program, MSTIP. And we thought it would just be a good idea just to step back a little bit and walk through some of the history behind the program. I think we only have one commissioner on the current board who was on the board during the last allocation process, so we'll talk a little bit about how that process went. And really just wanting to start to frame up a conversation about what that next program might look like. So that's really our intent and objective today. I have a few folks with me that I want to introduce. I've got Chris Steffenbach, who's going to be sort of our day-to-day project lead on this effort, our senior policy analyst. We have Aaron Wardell, who's our principal transportation planner. Aaron's going to be a key part of our project team. And then Joe Yonkins, I hope, is with us as well. Joe's our capital project services division manager. And so Joe's team are the ones that actually handle the project delivery elements of the program. And then we just framed up a few questions for you that are in the work session briefing packet. So just seeing if you have questions about prior policy direction for MSTIP, any initial thoughts about direction for the next round of MSTIP, and then is there additional information that would be helpful as we proceed down this path going forward. Next slide, please. Sorry, next slide. Oh, thank you. So, excuse me. As I mentioned, we envision this being the first of several sessions as we go. And again, sort of as we talked about, what our objectives are here today. So next slide, please. So we thought it'd be helpful to start with a little bit of context about how MSTIP sort of fits into the larger county transportation funding portfolio. So MSTIP is the blue slice of the pie that you see there. And it's a pretty sizable chunk. It's just about equal to the amount that we receive for state gas taxes and fees. So the MSTIP, TDT, and grant funds are typically the way that we deliver most of our larger capital improvement projects. What we call the road fund, which we talked about earlier during our financial update, that's really devoted primarily toward road maintenance and operations. Next slide. So just to step back, a few just highlights about the MSTIP program. We think knowing just a little bit of the statistical stuff, right, about the history, and then we'll talk a little bit about what the program has achieved as we've gone through. So it started in 1986. It is a countywide property tax, essentially, that helps to improve major roads, or roads of countywide significance is a term that has been used in the past. We've used a pay-as-you-go approach historically for the most part, and there's an exception to that we'll talk about a little further into the presentation. And to date, in the MSTIP program, we've allocated funding to more than 150 projects. And again, that's going back to 1986, so 35 years. And we'll talk a little bit in another slide about just some of the changes in the county since that time too. But in that time, that 150 projects, we've allocated more than $900 million in funding over that sort of 35, 36-year period now. And we typically have a recurring cycle where we come back to the board for these prioritization and project allocation decisions on roughly a 5-year cycle. So this is a unique program. It's the only one like it, as far as I'm aware of, in the state that has become an ongoing program. And I think we're ready to go. Next slide, please. So here's just a quick timeline of the previous program allocations. So MSTIP began in 1986 as a serial levy, a local option levy. And that a second round of that was adopted in 1989 by the voters. And then again in 1995 was MSTIP 3, the third serial levy. So really 1995 was the last time that the voters approved a levy specifically for this purpose. And then as a result of changes that happened at the state level with measures 47 and 50, the net result of that was that the levy rate that was in effect during the MSTIP 3 program was reduced and then rolled into the base property tax rate for the county and essentially became a part of our ongoing property tax revenue stream. So subsequently, the board has continued to sort of honor the intent of an MSTIP program by allocating a portion of general fund revenues to subsequent cycles of MSTIP with more or less the same intent and purpose, just continuing to enhance that countywide transportation system. And since the changes in the property tax took effect, we've been calling the different programs MSTIP 3B, C, D, and E. So as we think about our next cycle, it would normally be called 3F. We've talked about this before. We're going to come up with a better name than that at some point, but 3F is sort of our working title for the time being. Next slide. So the board ultimately makes the funding decisions for the MSTIP program, but the Washington County Coordinating Committee and its Transportation Advisory Committee also provide support and guidance in the program as well. So the Coordinating Committee is the policy committee. That's typically elected officials from the cities and the county. And one of the things they do is sort of review program criteria and provide input to the board on that. They look at projects based on sort of the funding available and the program criteria, and then ultimately forward a recommendation on the program and projects to the board for board consideration. And the WCCC, the Transportation Advisory Committee, again, that's a staff level advisory committee that supports the policy body, the Washington County Coordinating Committee. So that's county and city staff. Again, they historically have definitely taken a big role in helping to put together the list of potential candidate projects, going through the evaluation process, using the criteria that are established, and then helping to provide their technical review and recommendations to inform the WCCC. Next slide. So as we start this process, we thought it would be a good idea to just take a quick look back. And so as I mentioned earlier, the county has changed quite a lot since 1986. And if you look at the last bullet on this slide, actually, we have added 326,000 people to the county and grown 256,000 jobs in that intervening sort of 35-year period. So in terms of population, that's about 2.5 times. Our current population is now 2.5 times what it was back then. And our employment has more than tripled in that time frame too. So we've obviously grown a lot. And I think this program has been really critical to helping accommodate that growth as more people move in, more development, more businesses, and the need obviously to move people and freight around back and forth between all of those things. So I think, and I think demographically too, obviously we've changed a lot. So looking back in 1980, at the 1980 census, about 94% of county residents identified as white. And in 2010, which is now even a decade old, it was a 70% white ratio. And I anticipate that when we see our 2020 numbers, that'll also be a lower number again. So, as our population has changed and become more diverse, our needs in transportation have also changed and become more diverse. So some of the successes we think in the program are that it has added a whole lot of pedestrian and bicycle infrastructure in addition to providing road capacity and helping improve road safety. We've implemented a lot of access management through those projects, added traffic signals, and made other safety improvements over time. One of the criteria, and we'll touch on this here in another slide, is that we have tried to distribute the funding geographically throughout the county because it is countywide property tax revenues. We think it's an important tenet that various parts of the county see the benefits of the program. And we've obviously created consulting and construction jobs in that process. And again, for community benefit, we have, I believe, improved our access for people to get to their jobs, their schools, and other destinations in the community. And the MSTIP also helps leverage development opportunities too. So we've been successful. I think, sometimes when you build it, they will come. And so in terms of a economic development or recruitment tool, having a robust transportation system certainly can be helpful in that regard. This is just a map that shows the projects that have been funded back to 1986, and we've overlaid that on Metro's mapping of areas of equity concern. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, I thought you moved to the next slide.
Oh, yeah. So I did want to just point out on the map there. So we've superimposed the Metro areas of equity concern layer on top of the projects. And I think what you can see is that it reflects a pretty good distribution of the projects. And so, we like, I think what we've seen there, that there has been a lot of investment in some of those areas that are critical. And obviously going forward, we had some conversation about this during the tolling work earlier, that equity is definitely a bigger consideration than it was in the past as we've been through this process. So we are looking at how we incorporate equity concerns into our next program. And I liked the definition that was discussed earlier, thinking both about process equity and outcome equity, and then just this notion that what we're looking for is sort of that equitable distribution of benefits and burdens. I think those are both really good definitions that we can use as a part of our process going forward.
Stephen, if I could just make a quick comment on this.
Yes.
Before you move on. When I moved here in '83, Hillsborough was 27,000 people. There are 102 or 4 or 5 or something right now. So obviously a multiple of 4. But what would be interesting, and that was in '83. So you said MSTIP came in '86. Mm-hmm. There was no Cornell Road when I moved here. At least it wasn't anywhere what it looks like right now. Of course, we've got a lot of other things. Do you have any idea how many new lane miles we have added over that period of time, considering that the boundaries of Washington County probably haven't changed, but certainly the densities, and there was a lot of areas back in '86 that didn't have any roads. And now they have some major arterials going through them. Out here, at least, we've got Evergreen, we've got Brookwood, we've got Cornell and Cornelius Pass, and all of those have been significantly enhanced. And so, do you have any idea how many new lane miles we've added over that period of time?
I should have that off the top of my tongue here, or on the tip of my tongue, but I'll throw the question out to our team here to see if anybody has an approximate number. I think we've, as I recall, it's well over 100 miles, maybe 120 miles of centerline improvements in terms of lane miles. That's a number that I would need some help on.
It's about 120 miles. That's not lane miles, but that's centerline miles.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
Is that on the next the next slide? I should have waited. I see completed miles 121, but I didn't know if that was actually new lane miles. But anyway, that's an interesting statistic.
Yeah.
When you consider how much money we've spent.
Yeah, Joe's taking a look at it. He'll see if he can get us a number.
It's not necessarily new, though. I just want to caution that we have done a number of improvement projects of roads that were primarily rural in character, and we built them up to urban standards.
Right.
Stephen, I have one point on this slide too before you leave. One of the things that the coordinating committee has tried to do very hard over many years is provide an equity lens, and that equity you're using POC as one. There we're using obviously equity, meaning in terms of districts, and then they were saying equity in terms of economic equity. And unless I'm really missing something, that slide really points that we've been pretty good at putting projects in areas that were defined by Metro's maps as POCs, LEAP, and low income areas. I see some outliers. I mean, down in my area, you can see some long projects, but there's roads that really don't have much population, but they're connectors between various cities. But for the most part, it looks like we've tried to do that, and we've done it. Am I missing something?
No, I think that's a fair assessment, and I think you raise an interesting point too. That just by virtue of a project being in an area that happens to be an area of equity interest, you mentioned some of the roads that are maybe outlying and may not be in an area that's identified as an equity area, but that's an important commute route for folks that may be going from Aloha to a family wage job down in the Tualatin area, for instance, right? So there are access benefits that can accrue regardless of the specific location. So it's equity is a nuanced topic, and so there can be benefits of a project regardless of the location, and whether it benefits transit access, right? Those are important considerations as well. Okay. Any other questions before we move on? Okay, next slide, please. So we have what we call, I mentioned earlier, the system of countywide interest, and so we've identified with the WCCC this network of arterials, which are the roads that are colored in blue, and then what we call collector roads. So arterials are sort of the highest level of classification. They're meant to be the longest and carry the most sort of through traffic across the county. Collectors, the red roads, are sort of the second tier. So they serve the purpose of sort of collecting traffic from within neighborhoods or within a business area, and then providing a path for that traffic out to that arterial, the more major arterial system. So on this map, what it identifies, you can see there are a total of 422 centerline miles that are included on this system of countywide significance map, and we've completed about 121 miles out of that using the MSTIP program. And I think that this was developed as a tool to try to help create some eligibility criteria. So honoring the intent that with a countywide property tax, we were looking to try to help improve roads that serve a countywide benefit or provide a countywide function, or at least a fairly broad function, right, support within the area. So I think, again, this was a tool that was developed as a way to try to, look at eligibility. And so let's see, next slide, please.
Can I ask a question on this map?
Absolutely.
So if my memory serves me right, thinking back to when I was a community advocate in 04 through 06, and then starting at Metro, I recall the map of county significance, or countywide interest, as you refer to it now, changing significantly to include eligible collectors.
Mm-hmm.
So if I look at the map, red sort of is a really bold color, but you've done pretty darn well in making progress in those red lines as well. It might be interesting to get a subset out of the total 422 and 121. What's the progress for the completed versus the eligible arterial and principals versus the eligible collectors? Because it's been a successful program making headway
Yep.
Cycle after cycle.
Right. Plugging away.
Yep.
That's right. Yeah, that's a great question. So we can certainly do that. Okay. Okay, let's move on to the next slide, please. Thanks. So I want to talk a little bit about the Opportunity Fund, the MSTIP Opportunity Fund. This was something that was established in 2012, and essentially it functions as a sort of set aside or an off the top allocation from a particular MSTIP funding cycle. So we initiated this in 2012 with the MSTIP 3D program, and in that 5-year cycle, and I should say we, the board, opted to set aside $5 million in this Opportunity Fund. And the Opportunity Fund really provides a source for local agencies to secure external grants using some of this funding as a local match. And it's proven to be extremely successful. So we've taken about $7.6 million in opportunity funds to date and leveraged about $45 million in additional outside funding from either regional, state, federal, or private dollars. So that's about a 6-to-1 return on investment. So we think that's been very successful. And it has really allowed us to advance pedestrian, bicycle, transit, and travel demand projects. And so it's really, I think, helped improve the multimodal aspects of the MSTIP. And there's a few examples that you see listed there, parts of the Tualatin River Greenway Trail, the Regional Active Transportation Management System, and then we've had 9 successful Safe Routes to School grants that have utilized some of that matching funds. So yes, go ahead, Chair.
Quick question. At some point, I'd be interested in knowing what the number of Opportunity Fund projects have been versus what has been successfully granted through that leverage. That's all.
Yeah, I think Aaron can probably pull that up for us even while we're talking about it.
It's okay. We don't need to do it all today. Just letting you know what I'm interested in.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay, we'll follow up on that. Yep. All right. Writing myself a note. Okay. Okay, well, let's go on to the next slide then. So I wanted to just talk a little bit about the MSTIP 3E. So that's the cycle that we're currently in. We're probably just about halfway through that cycle. So now it is time to go ahead and start planning ahead for the next cycle so that we have a continuous stream of projects in the pipeline. So the MSTIP 3E program was approved by your board back in October 2016. And it sort of was intended to cover fiscal years 2018-19 through fiscal year 2022 and 23. The allocation was $175 million total, so about $35 million each over a 5-year period. Within that allocation, there was $160 million that was set aside for 23 projects. And the projects are a combination of road design, road construction, some bicycle and pedestrian projects more specifically. And so it's a good mix, I think, of different kinds of projects that have been funded through there. We also had a $7 million set aside for rural bridge improvements. And so as you looked at that map earlier, you saw some dot projects out in the rural area. Several of those have been bridges that have not had an identified funding source available to them. And so that's been a really successful element of that program as well, just to help ensure that our rural area bridges stay safe. In the MSTIP 3E program, we actually allocated $7.5 million in opportunity funds, and that was a 50% increase from the $5 million that we started with in MSTIP 3D. And that was just, again, based on the success that we were experiencing with the program and the level of interest that we were experiencing. And then finally, in both the 3D and the 3E programs, we have allocated $500,000 over that 5-year period for intelligent transportation system enhancements. And so a lot of that is really backbone infrastructure that's really helping to build fiber connections, but that help link up all of our traffic control signal devices. We have some other sort of smart safety features that we've been able to incorporate using that funding. So another good, I think, component that helps really round out the benefits of this larger program. Next slide. So this is a map that just shows the MSTIP 3E projects. And so again, I think you see that we have continued to work as we go through each one of the phases to try to help make sure that we're getting a good distribution of projects in various parts of the county. Next slide, please. So the eligibility criteria that have been used in the past, and most recently with MSTIP 3E, were improving safety, improving traffic flow or relieving congestion. Again, back to the system of countywide interest, that the project should be on major roads that are used by many residents. And then we're trying to, again, be multimodal, so projects that address demands for all types of travelers, right? So people in cars, people in trucks, freight, people on bikes, pedestrians, and people that are using transit. And then again, of course, the geographic distribution idea. Next slide, please. So the process that we used last time, this is just a pretty simple high-level summary of that process, but the board initially provided direction on the approach to the program and criteria for evaluation. We went through then a project solicitation process with the cities and did some initial evaluation. The Washington County Coordinating Committee and the board recommended a 150% list, so a list of projects that was 50% more than we actually would have funding available for. And then we took that 150% list out for public comment and then used the public comments as an element of trying to help narrow down a 100% list or the final funding list that was adopted ultimately, recommended by the WCCC, and then ultimately adopted by the board. Next slide, please. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the MSTIP bonding cost sharing program. So this is the exception I noted earlier to the pay-as-you-go approach that we have historically used with MSTIP. And this program, we briefed on this several months ago when we were looking at a potential modification to a project on the project list for this program. But it was really designed to try to help figure out how we could sort of jumpstart or accelerate some needed capacity and safety improvements in and adjacent to areas that were coming into the urban growth boundary, and we were anticipating pretty rapid development would occur there, placing some pretty significant demands on the transportation system in those areas. And so the board opted to create this program, and so there's a very conceptual graphic pictures for me help tell the story. And so this is a very simplistic thing that shows that the sort of red area is, holding the MSTIP funding level has remained constant, what I would call the base MSTIP program. That's the pay-as-you-go program. So the funding level there has remained constant over time. And as the amount of funding allocated for the overall MSTIP program has grown, that incremental revenue has been captured and will be used to pay the debt service on a series of bonds that some have been sold and some remain to be sold yet to fund the projects on the high growth project list. So it's very similar to the idea of a tax increment finance approach, is essentially what this looks very much like. And you can see on the left there is the list of the areas that this funding was targeted toward. And that list was a total of $140 million estimated costs for 20 projects total. And yeah, one of the foundational ideas behind this program too was that MSTIP provides 2/3 of the funding, and that leverages additional inputs from cities, developers, or others to make up the final 1/3. And so it helps to stretch the MSTIP dollars by securing those other funding sources. And I think it was equally important, not just addressing needs in some of the new high growth areas, but equally important was really preserving a substantial base program that would still allow us to have meaningful progress made on other areas of need throughout the county that hadn't been addressed yet as well. Next slide.
Stephen, quick question.
Yes.
What year started that 10-year clock?
Well, the the 10 years is kind of a loose time frame. That was an assumption that we made about how long it might take to deliver. But the board approved the program in 2016, or no, I'm sorry, 2015 actually. And so year one, I would say, was really about 2017 was when we really started getting those first projects going.
How long is that bonding period?
Well, it sort of ebbs with the projects and when we do the bond sales, and there are some different scenarios that we'll be taking a look at for how we move this forward. So there's not a simple answer to your question, I guess, is what I'll say for now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. All right. Next slide, please. So this is just a look at the project map that was adopted with the high growth program, and this does reflect the recent amendment that your board approved back in February, which was a change to a bridge allocation in the South Hillsborough area. And this does highlight those 4 growth areas that were being targeted with the program. And as I noted, it was envisioned as something like a 10-year program, and so we identified there were a list of projects in years 1 through 3. And then a list that kind of fell into a couple of other tiers of years 4 through 10. So we've made a lot of progress. Our year 1 through 3 projects are mostly completed. We've made substantial headway on design and even some construction for that second tier of the 4 to 10 project list. And we do have a number of projects where we're partnering with Willamette Water Supply Commission to help install both pipeline and do road improvements as a tandem project, and doing that to both minimize inconvenience on the public, but also just to try to help ensure that we get the pipe in the ground before we do the road improvements and don't have to have any damage to the roads in order to get the pipeline in the ground. Next slide, please. So we've taken sort of a first very preliminary look at what we think are some steps for this next round of MSTIP. And this is, I think, where we would love to hear your feedback and suggestions that you may have as we start to move this forward. So basically, just, part of what we've just done today is really thinking about, the past success of the program and what we've learned along the way. We're starting the process now of really identifying gaps in our system, and that's both sort of vehicular capacity gaps, but certainly bicycle and pedestrian system gaps in this, so that we sort of have a sense of where the needs are. We intend to start a process, and we'll bring back to you a review of the project solicitation guidelines and some evaluation metrics for discussion. We definitely know that we're going to be incorporating an equity lens in this project, as we discussed earlier, and developing a public engagement approach. And I think we're really hoping that with this process, we'll be really able to start increasing our community engagement and really making this a public process. And then, of course, we'll be checking in with the board and with the Washington County Coordinating Committee for input on the project and program priorities as we move forward through this process. And then one of our next steps will be to come back to the board with a proposed approach and schedule project. And so I think we've got some time allocated, maybe on a work session in, is it May, Chris?
Yes, we're hoping to come back in May.
Yeah, okay, thank you. So that'll be our our next significant checkpoint with the full board. And so, yeah, we know that we have work to do here. Obviously, I think we really want to, like I said, up our game on our engagement and our equity approach to the allocations here. And as I said, we'll welcome any feedback that you have when we wrap up the presentation. So let's go to the next slide really quickly. So our upcoming there we go. Answered my question. So here we are today, just sort of talking about history and starting an initial discussion with you all. We'd like to come back in May then to sort of review a draft work plan for how we move this next program selection forward. In June again, then to confirm a final work plan. And then we anticipate quarterly or bi-monthly or somewhere in between updates to the board over the course of another 12 months or so as we work our way through that sort of prioritization process. And then we hope to seek adoption of a funding program by the board in summer 2022. And I believe maybe if we could go back to slide 2 at this point. I apologize. Chris and I realized we neglected to put our question slide at the end here. So just as we talked about the purpose here too, just any questions that you may have or thoughts that you'd like to share with us at this point, and open it up for any questions and comments. Thank you.
So to help, they're looking for potential, well, first, any questions, then potential direction and any additional information.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Go ahead, Jerry.
Well, so I'm on the next slide after this one, your last slide, no, the other direction, slide 17. And when you say, the review the draft work plan, confirm the work plan, I mean, I think as your presentation reflected, this has been a pretty successful program. It was my understanding that the technical advisory committee, or whatever you call that group, that's the transportation geeks from around the county that gets together, they identify all these projects. Is my understanding there was about 400 projects or something on the last MSTIP that was kind of filtered through down to the 150. Then it went to a public evaluation kind of a criteria. I mean, so what kind of things are you thinking? I mean, are you thinking that we need to redo some of this? We need to expand that? What are your thoughts on that?
I think what we're saying. So I to make a clarification. So what we did the last time when we worked with the county staff members, the TAC, WCCC TAC, we had what we called a 400% list. Essentially, the projects that were put forward totaled about 4 times the available amount of funding.
Maybe
so
that was the number.
Yeah, that was the initial starting point. And I can't remember the number of projects, but obviously it was way more than we could actually fund. So we went from that 400% list and using the criteria that had been sort of vetted through the WCCC and the board, we were able to winnow that down to what we called the 150% list, and then took that list out for public comment. So there's no, I guess I would say there's no shortage of identified needs. In our transportation system plan, we've got billions of dollars in identified long-term system improvements, and so with the idea that we're allocating about $35 million a year, we're steadily chipping away at that big number. And so the prioritization is a really important element of this. What are the priorities for how we deploy that limited funding? And I do think that that's really where we're hoping to really get more early public input into that process. Really talk with our community and try to assess what people's needs and sense of priority is to help provide informed information for you all as you consider policy directions and ultimately a funding allocation.
Okay, well, yeah, I just think this is a really successful program, and I don't see a need to modify the process much. And as they talk about again in slide 16, we talk about incorporate the equity lens. I think there's probably a few definitions of equity that need to be certainly evaluated in this process, but up to now, the equity lens has been basically a distribution of projects around the whole county, hasn't it? Hasn't that been the definition of equity? So it's fairness for everybody around the county.
Yeah, I guess I would characterize that more as like a sort of a geographic distribution, right? So something like a equal. It's hard to say equal because there's really not a good way to measure that, but the idea of just sort of distributing the funding around on projects throughout the county certainly has been one of the guiding principles of the program.
Well, and I just remember the 8 years that I spent on the WCCC. I thought it was a great collaborative group. And yeah, we haggled over a few projects here and there, but for the most part, there was a lot of consensus on the importance of projects. I just remember Mayor Doyle and I from Beaverton having conversations about the Walker Road thing and everything else. It was in his jurisdiction, but it certainly was going to be very beneficial to the citizens of Hillsborough. So again, I just thought the whole process and the relationships really make this thing work well. So I hope we don't, mess that up.
Yeah, no, I think you raise a really good point, and it's probably one I should have stressed. Chris probably had it in my little talking points here somewhere, but that really has been a critical element of the success in the program. I think it really is that collaboration and the coordination that happens between the county and the cities, and just this notion that we have worked through difficult decisions together, and people are sometimes willing to concede something for the what may be perceived as the greater good. So I think all of those things are important considerations that you mentioned. And so going forward, yeah, we anticipate that we'll still have a very collaborative process, and I do think that just really thinking about how we up our game in terms of our engagement with our community, and then I think just that different sense of equity, a more nuanced sense of what equity really means, right? That we're really trying to help create a more level playing field for all of our community members.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Stephen, I have a couple of points too, but first I would be remiss if I didn't mention the huge relationships and collaboration between the cities. And when Jerry was on there for 8 years, as he points out, I can remember those good-humored arguments between Hillsborough and Beaverton about projects, but they both came to the table willing to negotiate. And the sense of this program, it hasn't ever been parochial. It's always been county-wide. So that's very, very important. And so I would commend Jerry for all of his involvement. The equity portion needs to be explored because not only was it a distribution amongst various districts, and if you look at those, you'll find that any district who thinks they didn't get a fair share, I think needs to go back and look at the numbers. It's been very equally distributed. But beyond that, it was multimodal. And so we were looking at bike ped and also projects of transit and how they all fit. And so when you look at areas of folks of maybe less economic means, you'll see that people were well aware that we needed to run projects into there. And so that's why that overlay I pointed out, doesn't it match pretty well? Not completely, but it matches pretty well. So I would make the point that maybe we need to say, what does equity mean? I mean, we use that word a lot, and I certainly would like to know how we're doing that, and I know the mayors would like to know that as well. Other points is regarding the bonding project. Sure, we're going to meet the obligations, but it's a time period. So if you go up to North Bethany, for instance, let's pick on that area for a minute. If you're telling them it's going to be 15, 20 years out for a project, just simply because of cash flow, if you tinker, as again, Commissioner Willer is pointing out, if you tinker with it too much, we've got some significant issues and congestion. Or if you go into South Hillsborough, you got the same problem. Or if you go into South Beaverton, you got the same problem where we have all those projects. So there isn't a pot of money, unless you have been hiding it, because I've been poking at you forever. I don't see any pots of money that are going to do these bonding projects unless somehow we prioritize and not mess with the time period in which they're delivered. In my own specific area, and I consider the whole county it, and so I like South Hillsborough, I like North Bethany, I like South Beaverton. There was a project called the Southwood Corridor Project. And everybody thought down here that because the county committed 75 million, that you'd have a piggy bank of 75 million. Everyone has been asking me, where's their 75 million bucks so that they can start doing some projects, in which I politely explained that there is no pot of money. I mean, that was all future. It's like Social Security program. It only works long as somebody's paying into it. If it doesn't get paid into it, it collapses. But what are you going to do? Because I'm in it. Jerry pointed out, well, it's all relationships. What are you going to do along that corridor where we're asking on the federal level to once again look at it? And I think Pam did a good job in regard to her leadership on that moving forward. Everybody agreed on this board that was an important project. So I know that's the next topic.
Mm-hmm.
But how's that 75 million and how's that corridor going to work in if we start changing the prioritization? Or do I need to tell city mayors down here, which is a bunch of them, that somehow that's not popping up in this next distribution? Because they're even small projects. It's nice to talk about transit, but if you don't have any, as Paul Savas over in Clackamas always points out, and his board points out, you've got none. It's not a whole, it's not a great discussion. You got to have some minimum. We have it, but we want to certainly foster it. And I know out between Beaverton and Hillsborough, you've got a project on the blue line there, an overpass that you want to do that, it's another project that's been sitting out there forever in the transit area. So what's my question right down bottom line? What are you going to propose, or what should you be proposing in regard to fulfilling that bonding program? Because as I understand, there's one project out of that whole list that's even been significantly done. One. So there's a lot more to go. What are we going to do there? What are we going to do on the Southwest Corridor to make them whole, as well as try to make certain that everybody within all 4 districts has some distribution of money so that they can put those bike and ped and those transit projects in. So long-winded way of saying, I think we need to message somehow better than what we're doing right now.
Yeah, and I think you've raised a really interesting, almost really a series of questions there, and I think that we have more questions probably than answers at this point. I think it's a little bit unclear right now what the future for Southwest Corridor looks like. The federal funding picture is changing, and so we're following that pretty closely, and that'll actually be our next topic. And then we're, I think you touched on something that could be a consideration as we move forward. There were a number of sort of complementary projects or things that would have been components of the larger Southwest Corridor measure that could potentially be funded with other sources. So some of those could end up on a potential list of candidates that could be considered for MSTIP funding. So I just don't, I can't give you a good answer at this point, but I think you've raised some really interesting points, and they're certainly on our mind as well.
But I think he's really wise to raise these questions, because no matter how you set the stage for proceeding, these questions are going to come up. So we need to have plausible answers to the questions. I don't know what those answers, I'm not leading to some particular answer, but they need to be clear answers, and they need to be consistent answers over the course of time.
Right. Yeah, and again, I think we're just in such a period of uncertainty with what the future of the Southwest Corridor is. That makes that a difficult one to answer, but it's absolutely something that's top of mind for us too. Well, among other things, but it's certainly on our minds.
Not to belabor this, but Stephen, can you talk about the bonding project? One project that I know of that's been done. What kinds of assurances have you been giving to the folks in South Hillsborough on theirs, or North Bethany on theirs, that it'll be delivered not in 2050, but something a little bit sooner?
Yeah, I don't have the numbers in front of me, Commissioner, but I think we've completed 5 of those projects, and we've got another 5 or 6 that are well underway in various stages of design or construction. So we're making a lot of headway on that bonding program list, and so I want to dispel any misinformation there. That we have made good progress on that and continuing to press forward.
Thank you, because the last time I talked to you, you said 1 was done, and so now I hear 5.
Oh, yeah, no, I think maybe Tier 1, our list of Tier 1 projects, that first grouping is mostly complete.
How about Tier 2?
So Tier 2, that's where a lot of our current progress is that we're under construction on several of those projects and in design on a number more. And we've got 3 or 4 that are scheduled to probably break ground within the next year.
So it's 4:15. Do you want to take questions and follow up, or do you want to try and answer all the questions per commissioner and somehow we get done?
Yeah, I'll defer. we can write down some questions. Absolutely. Well, and maybe if you have additional questions or thoughts, certainly feel free to send us an email or give me a call. We'll be happy to chat. And I appreciate your time today. And if we have
Whoa, wait a second. You've only heard from 2 commissioners. You got 3 more to go.
Yep. So yes, and I just want to say that, yeah, I go ahead.
So, Commissioner Trees, Commissioner Fye, any thoughts or the 3 items? Any questions? Thoughts on potential direction and any additional information? It's okay to say you don't have any. It's all right.
I don't have any questions. Stephen, I'm excited to see what the project solicitation guidelines and incorporating some equity lens into that. And I think this comment is about supplier diversity outcomes and really looking into historical data on who has gotten paid so far. So I'm excited to hopefully see some of those data and really look into that. And then, I think I've talked to you about this and emailed you, but, what do we do for unincorporated areas of Washington County in terms of advocacy and partnership for those areas, since they don't have mayors to build partnership and to sort of consolidate the power of advocacy. So something to consider, and that's all for me, Chair.
All righty. Commissioner Trees.
Well, I thank you for the presentation. I really enjoy the historical perspective, the perspective of how everything's worked out collaboratively. I particularly enjoy hearing about the leveraging of the grant monies, and I've watched how successful that can be for a number of years. So it's not necessarily the big bucket of money, but it certainly has been meaningful for a lot of people. So that's very cool. One of the things I'm just going to raise to my fellow commissioners here is that I'm very committed to making sure that we continue to have the MSTIP program and in the percentages that we have always agreed to adhere to. And the reason I'm bringing this up is I remember before Commissioner Scouten left, he made a comment about using MSTIP money for another purpose, and it's escaping me right now what it was, but I just want my fellow commissioners to know that I'm really committed to making sure that MSTIP money stays focused in the original purpose. So that's my little speech on that issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Trees. You raised one of the points I wanted to try and put everyone at ease now, and to ask commissioners to really call the question, can we please commit to continuing to dedicate MSTIP funding to transportation? And not, as one of our colleagues posited late last year, to use it for other purposes. Okay, cleared up. Thank you. So I just have a few points. I'm very much a visual person, and so I would like an additional overlay map that takes the county-wide interest and blends that with the equity areas. Certainly across the region, there has been this emphasis on the diversity, the cultural diversity, ethnic diversity, poverty, equity maps. So I think this is the first full MSTIP program that is using that treasure trove. So it'll be interesting to see what that highlights to us. I do need a bigger county-wide interest map than just what I'm able to print out on a slide for 8.5 by 11. So I don't know how to go about that. Let me flip over to my pages here. I've already shared a couple of questions. So with MSTIP 3E, one of the things that wasn't really summarized was what the public engagement model was.
Mhm.
And so I'm looking for a summary nonetheless, but a comprehensive summary that enumerates the different aspects of public engagement. And because it, different needs, different times. And the team always strives to do its best. So we talked through the Farmington Road project in a one-on-one, how there was the online open house, but it turned out that it really needed a side video to go along to explain it. So, I think that is the game has continued to step up in terms of what are the support materials that go along for an online open house or an online public engagement. So I don't expect that you're going to propose a public engagement style for the 2020s as the same as you did in the 2010s. And it may take some more resources, right? Some more videographers, graphic designers. So put on your creativity hats and have at it. I'm interested. When I think about a next phase, I'm trying to get my head around what does system completion look like? I remember back in 3D when corridors were added, and one of the reasons for that was because in the south part of the county, there weren't or still aren't many arterials and principal arterials. And so having corridors of county significance helped support that geographic equity. And but I'm struggling a little bit with the blue and the red, right? Being able to see, okay, if we just focused on the blue, are there just areas of completion in certain pockets, right? Whereas in other areas, we need to deal with more of the solid red, right?
Mhm.
There aren't
Mhm.
the blues so much. So, but
Okay.
I need help to work through that. On slide 16, you talked about the initial scoping. And the last bullet, confirm board direction on approach and schedule. Yes, you have a lot of projects in the RTP. Or in the Washington County TSP, right? We also have the regional active transportation plan that is part of the RTP now, with the policy of completing the active transportation plan in 20 years. Well, so I don't know what that tells us about those pedestrian way, bike way, and other intersection improvements. So I don't know what that data source might look like, or that set. Then also Get Moving 2020 had fantastic projects that would advance equity, safety. Remember, now we have a safety plan that we didn't used to have. And so that may be a key elemental change in the project list for this phase. Once again, all of this is just ideas and in the idea stage, not direction from me, rather ideas. Make the plate or the tabletop messy first. And then, it's like taking a jigsaw puzzle and dumping it out on the table. And then you figure things out from there. Okay. Also on public engagement, I don't want us to do just a online public engagement. We really need to enable you to go work with the equity and community engagement team invest in some partnerships with CBOs, and that may glean information that is helpful for this set as well as future sets. You know, and I know you also have a lot of information based on the Aloha Reedville Community Plan and the subsequent. So then over to slide 17, upcoming board checkpoints. When I see the time progression, what I'm having a little bit of struggle with is seeing the milestones. So I see the work plan. What I'm looking for is, and what I couldn't quite see with my own eyes yet, or my brain, is I want to make sure we see a proposal for the eligibility criteria, and I can't see where that is.
Right.
So pretty ambitious to get there by summer of 2022. Whew.
Yeah, I've got a good team here.
Well, I'm all for aggressive yet achievable goals.
Right.
Right. And there's going to be a lot of information to plow through, and I don't want it to just be make a 400% list and put it out there and see what the public says. Right. I don't think that's going to be. I don't think they're going to appreciate it. And judging from how things are going, we have a lot of new city councils, very engaged, younger city councils, new to all of this, with pretty strong opinions about what they'd like to achieve. So I think we may have to make a concerted effort to either have special sessions for community counselors to come in and learn and figure out how to work with their staff on something that achieves their city council goals and objectives, or whatnot. So the whole engagement may be different than the last time. But I think where you're headed in terms of the outcomes, while I don't see a slide that says here are the things that define a successful outcome for a next phase. Oh, which reminds me, I flew by one page where I had a note. One of the things that I appreciated through the phases, and Commissioner Rogers will know this like the back of his hand, is on the design. I want to make sure that we keep working on having projects that go through the design phase, because that's where, with the opportunity grants, you are then able to leverage. And, you know, who knows what's going to happen with transportation and infrastructure finance going forward. The other piece that I need to better appreciate, even maybe just on 3E, is there's the right-of-way acquisition, there's design, and there's construction, just from an overview. And I don't know if I have the right model, right? But what we can ill afford is to define a 5-year program where that's all we do is invest in right-of-way, right? So how do we get our heads around what a balanced portfolio is of investments? So sorry, I'm asking for more data than I really want to have, but I think in the end it's going to help us bring a lot more people along.
Yeah, no, I appreciate your insights. That's very helpful as we get this going.
That's it for me. Any last thoughts or questions, commissioners? Very exciting. Thanks for kicking this off for us and teeing it up.
Thank you
Really
very much. Appreciate your feedback and your input today. Thank you.
Good job. Okay. So here we are at 4:30. We have 2 more topics that are slated to, oh, woo. My whole screen changed. Am I still here? Oh, there it is. There are 2 more topics for 30 minutes. So we'll dive right into the federal transportation funding priorities.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I'm gonna really ask Chris to take the lead on this one. This has been such a moving target. She and I were trying to finalize this presentation on Friday, and things are still changing a little bit. So I really appreciate Chris's hard work trying to stay on top of this and really touching base with a lot of our internal LUT team members, trying to help get together lists of projects and possible projects that we can discuss with you. And so I think with that, I'll stop talking and turn it over to Chris.
Thank you, Stephen, and hello, Chair and Commissioners, again for the second time today. And can you move to the next slide? So I'm going to punt to Erin Doyle, who is working closely with our federal delegation. And Erin and I are both working with regional partners within the metro area to coordinate our asks for potential federal earmarks and comments on programs and policies. So I'm going to let Erin clarify things here a bit at the beginning.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chair and Commissioners. I'm here because we are talking about a government relations meets transportation opportunity. And so we kind of wanted to talk through what the opportunity we're in right now. And this harkens back to the GR presentation you heard last week from our colleagues at Van Scoyoc Associates about the placement of earmarks back on the table as a potential opportunity to bring funding into the county. And so that conversation is still ongoing, but we want to be prepared and ready and have some of these projects lined up for consideration and your approval and your direction before we move forward at the regional table or even directly with our congressional delegation. So historically in this area of the metro region, we have worked as a region to kind of bring forward a set of projects, and that has proven to be very effective for bringing resources back to the area in order to invest in transportation projects in particular. Having that regional voice, having that unified commitment to projects has an impact across the region, but it also means we're more successful with our delegation. And in addition to that, with the roles our delegation is currently playing, we are really poised as a region to be very successful in any conversation around bringing dollars back to the community for investment in some of the many projects you guys are even starting to think about with the MISTIP and then the regional funding projects, state-based, all of those different areas, really having that successful opportunity. So next slide, please. So for today, we are coming to you to talk about potential federal transportation opportunities and get your direction on where you would like to see us prioritize as staff as we work through the regional process, going up to the JPACT recommendations through the staff recommendation process, but also as we talk with Van Scoyoc about what we are trying to accomplish for the county directly. And then also making sure that we're doing all the touch points that you need and desire related to that JPACT federal transportation prioritization process. So next slide. To kind of delve back to last week, but give a little bit more transportation shine on it. There are really three main areas in which we can bring back funding to the county and to the region. And the first is earmarks, and those are listed in two places here, both the annual appropriations earmarks, which are much smaller, not likely to have a regional, we're not sure yet where the JPACT process will happen for that, but more urgently right now is the earmarks and the reauthorization of the surface transportation bill. And this is where we have the opportunity to seek large amounts of funding to come back directly through direct community appropriations. And unfortunately, the time frame got tightened last week beyond what we thought we had. And basically, the committee chair on the House side, where the earmarks are first going to be under consideration, said, we need to hear from the congressional members by April 9th what your world of request is going to be, and you can have a hearing on April 14th. If we are proceeding in the regional process, we have to go through the JPACT meeting, and the only JPACT meeting between that announcement and April 9th is next week on March 18th. So The staff level committee called TMAC, which I don't remember what it stands for, and Chris can answer that question if you need to know that abbreviation, maybe, is that TMAC group has been meeting and kind of bringing forward potential projects. And we are now asking you to help us make sure that we're prioritizing what you would like us to prioritize in that conversation, so that staff committee can then make the recommendation up to JPACT at that March 18th meeting. The second way that we can really seize funding opportunities is through the state funds that come down from the feds to ODOT and then are dispersed back out to the local government through our MPO and as well as through our MPO. So those are two other areas where we can seek more funding and advocate for that at the federal level. And then the third is through the programs and policies that establish the grant programs at the federal level. We can influence the laws and rules that establish criteria, establish the size of the fund, all of the ways in which we can better advantage the projects we would traditionally go and seek a grant for. So if we can't get a direct appropriation, can we influence the thought process of the federal government so that our projects look even better for purposes of seeking grants? So also last week, on Thursday of last week, which is part of the reason why this presentation took a few turns, we got an email from Senators Wyden and Merkley asking for our recommendations for policy and programmatic changes by March 15th, which is even before the JPAC process will have had a chance to have a process. So right now, staff is working to put together some thoughts about how we can advantage some of the programs and projects that we would like to see either earmarks for or would like to try and seek grant funding for. So that is also a much more technical and a lot less detailed area. But that's one more area where we can get direction from you about how we approach those programmatic and policy questions with Senators Merkley and Wyden. I will also say in that email, they indicated that the Senate is unlikely to pursue earmarks, so that leaves the earmarks question very much up in the air. That being said, next slide, please. We wanted to talk through what we have determined are the criteria for success for an earmark. And this comes based on conversations with the Oregon delegation, past practices of what has been successful, and through the conversation with that TMAC staff committee, recommendations from JPACT are going to, or recommendations to JPACT to consider will have to meet these criteria really. So delivered within 5 years really means there's a possibility of a ribbon cutting or something to be developed. It can't be delivered with a project plan, but you have nothing you can see. Those aren't great earmark opportunities. Broad public support, which means it has to have had a public process around it. Aligns with the congressional priorities, which our delegation have really emphasized that it has to be a climate smart, there has to be an equity consideration, and and safety is also extremely important and very much a priority for our delegation as a whole. That aligns with a lot of the things that happened in the 2019 House bill. So more of that moving forward. And then finally, it can't just be that the only possibility is federal funding. They really want to see us having put chips in the ante to say that, yes, we're pulling down federal funding for these earmarks, but we are also willing to, we also prioritize this by putting our funds toward it. So it's not a match requirement like you often see with grants, but it is saying, yes, we are also invested here. So with that, I'll turn it back to Chris. I believe it is your turn to talk about what our recommendations are.
Okay, thank you, Erin, and thank you for being a partner in helping keep track of all of these moving parts. So we've submitted a couple of Friday facts and included this in our worksheet, agenda sheet, which was due before a lot of these more recent changes. And we identified several projects that we thought met these guidelines well. One of them is an intelligent transportation system improvement package, which are scalable. These are applied countywide. They fund backbone ITS infrastructure, and as well as promote or install more bicycle and pedestrian traffic detection of the traffic signals and transit signal priority. These can be delivered quickly. They build on our previous investments. They're coming out of our master plan, which has had public input, and they could be ready to go. So that seems like a win, and I believe the other two counties are also going to be submitting something similar. The next thing on the list is TV highway safety improvements. This project would need to be submitted by ODOT. So we have been working with ODOT to find out what of the huge costs that were submitted for Get Moving, which would be scalable, that could be implemented within a time frame and make a meaningful difference. As of last Friday, ODOT has come back with a proposal to include funding to implement the recommendations that came out of the recently completed Cornelius road safety audit, which would improve crossings and some illumination and other safety improvements in the stretch of TV highway between Dairy Creek and Cornelius, that stretch that recently came into the urban growth boundary, so it's really urbanizing. So that was their proposal. And I didn't mention cost, but the ITS is around 9 million. TV highway was around 8.5 or 9 million as well. I don't know if ODOT is also moving forward on some projects funded through the State Transportation Improvement Program that we helped put match funding in the Aloha and Hillsborough area. So we will be having, between those two, those projects, we should be seeing some safety improvements, incremental and small. We know that's what we're facing as a while here to get these all in place. The other option that seems like a very good candidate is upgrades to 170th between Merlot and Alexander Street. This is a road that is 2 lanes, or with basically it has no sidewalks or bicycle lanes. It serves the Merlot Max station at one end and connects down to TV Highway, and the other connects to Tualatin Hills Park. With 3D or E, we completed some concept design work for it. And this is something that our capital projects team believes that we could deliver. It has no known risks. And it would, again, hit those climate with access to transit, with safety, and through an equity area. These were 3 projects that floated to the top based on our review of them. And we think this cost for the 170th would be around 20 million. Next slide. Take the cat out. So we went through a lot, and in your packet we included, I think it ended up being 4 pages of additional projects that we would like to see funding for, and we will continue to be seeking grants for. These are 3 that we kicked around, but they didn't really fit the criteria well. One is the Basalt Creek Parkway extension. We don't think now is the right time to go after that project, and we can continue to seek a future build grant as we did before for that. Another one is the Farmington Road upgrade. I think we've had a decades-long jurisdictional transfer agreement with ODOT. We need funding to upgrade that road, but we are not ready. We don't have a design and we don't have a cost estimate. There would be quite a bit of risk associated with taking that on. And then another one we talked about following on the first last mile access study was ramp upgrades. And so we need to go back to the drawing board and do a little bit more work. We've learned that ADA ramps standalone aren't competitive, but we could combine this with some additional sidewalk infill projects for a future grant. Next slide. So as you saw in the long list that we included in the packet, we have many additional funding needs, and it's useful to put these together because it reminds us the broad range of projects that we are continuing to seek grant funding for, and it also can inform our input into what we'd like to see be developed as new programmatic funding buckets or categories or guidelines for the additional comments that we are being asked to submit in this process. But I'd like to, let's see if remind what the next slide is. So, okay, I can go one more slide and then I'll pause. So fortunately, we aren't starting from scratch and coming with policy and program positions. We were, as a regional team, we were on the way doing this when COVID hit last year, and we never finished that. So we were able to pick that up and dust it off and refresh it. Some of the things that we've kicked around before were requesting a new urban RTL program to fund things such as the jurisdictional transfer of Farmington Road and build up those streets that have not been able to keep up with the growth. Seismic, particularly on the West Coast, the need for seismic improvements. And we've seen this in emergency transportation routes work that is now being updated as well. There is a bucket of funding at the state level for safety programs. That's another place where there could be increases. We've talked in the past about transit funding and the desire to change that match so that it's more, if not 80-20 federal local, at least not 40-60. And there's some additional transit provisions that TriMet has developed in the past. Formula funding increases. This is another area. You may remember a few years ago, our region lost some of the dedicated revenue that went to the metropolitan planning organizations. And so that's another request to keep on the forefront. And then there's other projects for our build grant, for example. We would like to see the total overall maximum funding allocation increase as the project costs have increased. And so there's some, that's another area where we could comment. I won't pull you into all the weeds on that, but that gives you a sense of the kinds of things that we've commented on the past and we could likely emerge again. I think one more slide. So schedule. So as Aaron told you, the schedule's changing quickly. And what I'd really like today is to see if there's anything on that long list that you particularly want to ask about why isn't this a priority? You have better ideas of what we should be asking for right now. I'd also like to know, of the 3 projects that we put forward as the most viable, do you have a favorite? Because I've seen what others in the region are submitting, and there's going to be, it's going to be tough to get this to a number, but there is no real number. So that's the other thing, is how much can we ask for? And then I want to go off script here a little bit. This might be a little unusual, but I just learned today that at the meeting that Commissioner Willie's attending on Thursday, Northwest Act, where they're going to be talking about their priorities, I learned that they will be talking about federal earmark priorities. So there is another venue, even though it's the same congressional district with Congresswoman Bonamichi's district, but there is another venue to raise and have a discussion about priorities. So Commissioner Willie, we are pulling together some suggestions. And again, it is helpful to have that long 4-page list of projects to know what the board has previously expressed support for, so that it's helpful so that we aren't starting from scratch. So my suggestion would be that we can listen in. I know Joe Yonkins is already planning to listen in on that. We can summarize what we've heard and include that in our weekly Friday news for you as well. So it's a lot, and it's a lot going on. Yes.
Chris, sticking with the Northwest Act for a minute, do you know are they going to submit a list of their recommended projects as well? I haven't looked at the packet yet. That was tonight's homework. So I don't know that it's in the packet, but anyway, are they going to submit a list as well? And that's going to be the conversation.
That's what I understand from Mary MacArthur. I'm not sure they're going to do it tomorrow or Thursday, but what they have in the packet is the list they developed in 2019, and what we have put together is what projects have been completed since then. And then when I talked to Mary today, I got some ideas about some of the things that they've been thinking about, and I've been trading emails with Joe and Stacy and Todd over the last hour. So, well, I'll give you some suggestions.
So, commissioners, there are 5 of us, and staff is looking for direction to make sure we've given our staff as well as our JPAC rep direction from us. Commissioner Treese.
Thank you, Chair. Back to proposed earmark candidates on page 6. I'd just like to make a couple comments there. After working on Get Moving 2020, you know, I do have some strong feelings about these issues. And number one, I think ITS improvements meets the criteria and has a high probability of success. So that's, I believe that. Number two, I think that we really need to push on ODOT about the TV highway safety improvements, because we all did so much work. You guys did a ton of work to make sure that all of that was identified. I think it's a golden opportunity here, and I really hope that we can make that work and get regional support through those that participated in the Get Moving work that was done. The other piece that I wanted to throw out there, I'm aware that Hillsborough and TriMet are talking about the 185th overpass, and that was a big issue in Get Moving as well. You know, that not just for TriMet, for congestion issues, for a lot of different issues. So I recognize that, you know, what I've heard different stories about what TriMet may be proposing and what their ranking might be. But I think that that's something that we need to at least have a voice about, and the benefit that it brings to our regional system, or our county system. So that's it for me.
Yes, thank you. And I know we don't have time to go over every comment, but TriMet is still considering what they're going to submit on. And my understanding is they have not picked that as what they would submit. They would need to be the ones to submit. But that doesn't mean we can't keep it in the forefront to seek additional grants that could be funding through from FTA. So it is definitely on the list. It's like, how do we maneuver this process?
I think one thing that Chris and I didn't really clarify in this opaque process is that really the region is kind of looking at 3 different buckets, and we're talking about one of those buckets. There's the ODOT bucket, there's the TriMet bucket, and then there's the regional bucket. And within that bucket, they're aiming to try and keep it around $200 to $250 million in requests as a package. And so that really also, that's why some of those numbers become important in balancing our requests with the rest of the region and Washington County as a geography, not just as an entity. So I just want to position it that way as well, because I think that that's very important to recognize that we have to find many ways to get at this funding.
Right. There are others that are, I wouldn't say it's at 400% right now, but it is more than 100% list.
Commissioner Rogers.
Well, this has always been a delicate process, and so my point to Chris, you and Aaron is that, and others may know this, but the way it works, it's a very delicate dance between JPAC, who feels that, you know, that they coordinate the list, and they do, but the counties and cities all have their own priorities as well. And this year, for the first time, and my talking with a number of folks, you may hear at the staff level some unified approach. I certainly don't hear it behind the scenes at an elected level. And so I would certainly encourage you to be flexible in your process and understand that even our list at the county here does not provide a full bucket of projects throughout the county, mainly oriented in certain areas. And so you're going to find mayors, particularly in my area, who are going to have a different priority list. And the difficulty is that as much as we may think that we have some hook on one of these legislative folks, they all do too. They all serve the same constituents. So I would certainly encourage us to use some real diplomacy and relationships to try to get folks on the reservation. We've always done, I think, a pretty admirable job of saying, this is the Metro list. We're going to be with the Metro list, only to find everybody else was doing something different. But this time, I think it's going to be really, really different because they've already talked to mayors who are submitting their own lists, regardless of what we put down there. And that is so hard. I mean, if we're not all together, it is so doggone hard.
Mm-hmm.
I just encourage you to understand that in this short time period, you're going to need extreme diplomacy, extreme relationship building with them, so that not that you have to convince them of everything, but if there's 3 sets of ask, you know, one from every county, one from JPAC, and one from every city, the delegation is going to be hard pressed to make some meaningful list out of that. So anyway, just so that you know, it's a very different year.
Other commissioners?
I want to make a plug for Christina on the Farmington Road upgrade and hopefully have ODOT make the submission just like the TV highway. I think we definitely have the equity criteria, and so I just wanted to make a plug on that. I don't have any. I think this is a great list, and 2 of the suggested areas impact my district, so I'm definitely on board. But if there's any way we can include on that list, Farmington Road, it's also up there for safety concerns.
Yeah, it's definitely up there. I think the question is how much we ask for. I talked to ODOT about it, and we need their support to submit it, but I can bring that up again.
Any idea between you and Roy what ODOT may be up to?
Well, I worked with them to get TV highway added, and that was quite a bit to get that added. I'm not sure what they've got statewide requests coming in, so they are balancing what the needs are in the region and what their needs are statewide. They've got some big ticket requests coming in, like completing patching the funding together for I-205. So there's a lot that they are still balancing in terms of sorting out their priorities.
Chris, as you know, Region 1 is 4 counties, about 40% of the state between Hood River, Clackamas, Multnomah, and us. Region 1 manager Ryan is trying to do a good job of listening, but he's got so many people asking him so many things. I mean, I'm certainly happy to go to him behind the scenes. I have obviously that access, but I think it's going to be difficult to ask for on a lot of things. That's why I didn't throw in this delicate balance ODOT, but I play in that field too. They're going to come up with a different list too, and it's going to be four different entities trying to play this dance. And so it's, I wish we had another about month to put together choreography so that we're all talking off the book. And I would say this to my fellow commissioners. Metro has done an excellent job in coordination with TriMet. TriMet used to run it and then turned it over to Metro pretty much to run the JPAC agendas. They've done an excellent job in the past of not bludgeoning, but working with people to get a list that made some sense. And I think you're going to have not 3, as I told you before, but 4. And that is going to take a bit of massaging when you walk into, you know, at least 3, if not 4 or 5, 2 senators and at least 3 congressional districts and say, we got all these lists. And the next group's going to come in and we got this list. So it's too short.
Especially, yeah. Given time, Commissioner Willie, your thoughts?
Well, yeah, I guess my thoughts are I'm torn between the ITS improvements and TV highway safety improvements, so I could go with either one of those. And I'll leave that to
Right. So
Chris and Stephen there.
I think we have a shot at both of those because TV Highway, I think, even though it would be submitted by ODOT, it would be kind of in the regional county ledger as in terms of making it match the population share and everything. So it's helpful for us to know what of those three, what the priorities would be. And if you could pick those two, that's helpful. That's really helpful for us. And we could potentially go back and ask ODOT to plus up what they say they can do on TV Highway to make that a little bit more robust. That's another way to go.
Yeah, I'll go last. That sounds good to me. I'm concerned. I think all three of these are worthy, and I appreciate the work that you folks have put into taking the 4-page list and practicing the art of the possible. I'm concerned on the third one, the 170th Merlot to Alexander, that a lot of folks don't identify with Merlot as transit.
Mm-hmm.
They just don't. And so I think there's more work to be done to tell that story, to continue to increase its visibility, and to help weave in the equity aspect of that as well. Whereas I think the other two, as you mentioned earlier, climate equity and safety provide, there's a story there across those three, and I think people can relate to those. And of course, the attractiveness on the ITS one that can be done quickly is pretty attractive as well when we think about, the economy and contributing right away. So I just wanted to cut to the chase here, given time for today's meeting, but also given the timeline that you're working on.
Yeah.
For direction.
Well, I have to say, this is super helpful because the list is long, the competition is high, and as Commissioner Rogers said, there's a lot. It's hard. It's a little hard to keep everyone on the same page. So with this, what I take away is of our priorities, it's the ITS and the TV Highway. I would still ask if we can kind of plus up those other projects that are already out there, maybe include some illumination or something else. If we're going to give up on something, try to ask a little bit more. And for Farmington Road, I don't think that ODOT is ready to take that on, but I think it's an excellent example in asking for a programmatic a new programmatic bucket at the federal level to take care of these roads and at the state level as well. So this has been super helpful. I really appreciate this. We will do our best to keep you updated and Erin's going to help keep us on all these deadlines that change daily.
Yep, that's why you all excel at what you do. We appreciate it, and we're cheering you on. So
I've had some past experience in this process, and you really are doing a great job of coordinating, understanding where the pressures are, and being able to get things pushed forward. What Commissioner Rogers said about the difficulty of the situation is all very accurate, and we couldn't have a better team working on it. So thank you.
Well, thank you. All right. Well, thank you. I don't think that's anything else.
Not on that topic.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
So crew, we have one more topic that's anticipated to take 10 minutes. So you want to hang in there and try and get this done? Okay, go for it. The floor is yours. Run.
Perfect. Running now. Thank you very much, Chair and members of the Commission. My name is Mark Chalkers with Clean Water Services. I'm here today to talk to you about an item that we will be bringing to you at the beginning of April, which is the appointment of 2 people to Clean Water Services Advisory Commission. As you may recall, I spoke to you at the end of January to begin the recruitment for the District 1 position, which was formerly held by Commissioner Fye, and also to continue our recruitment on the agricultural representative position. I'm pleased to come back today with you that we had 2 applicants. on the District 1 position, Alexander Fan and John Duggar. And we had one applicant on the agricultural position, and that is Alan Jesse. Alan, we've worked with him a little bit. We've invited him to a couple of advisory commission meetings. Alan is a board member of the Tualatin Valley Irrigation District, who is a very close working partner with ours. So we feel very good about that. And I'm turning to you, and I think I would defer to District 1 Commissioner Fye on which of the two candidates you would like to move forward with in April.
Thank you, Mark. As the Commissioner for District 1, I've had a really positive conversation with Alex, and I'd like to move forward with Alex.
Very good. Thank you very much. We will reflect that in the board memo that we bring forward for the meeting. I believe it's on April 6th.
I just want to mention that Commissioner Fye hasn't heard this. I think 12 years is a long time for someone to serve on these committees. That's 3 of these 4-year terms. And so as I look at my one position, I'm really thinking about that longer tenure. But I think we've got some work ahead of us to take some of these folks. We have 2 folks that have been there for 14 years already, one that's been there 11 years. A couple is sitting at 9 years that we really have to look at what the future composition might look like. That's all. Thank you.
One thing I can add there, Chair, is as I mentioned in January, we have 4 openings that will open in August on the commission, including the at-large appointment, as well as Commissioner Treese's appointment for District 2, as well as a builder developer position and another agricultural position. So there will be opportunities certainly there. And I appreciate your enthusiasm and interest in bringing people to the table.
Okay, I think we're done with that item. Anything else folks need to close on for today? Okay, without further ado, we're successful in completing all 11 items in our long day. Thanks for your patience, folks.
Do we need to vote on that recommendation or no?
No, we vote on it in a business meeting. See ya.
Thank you, commissioners. Have a great evening.
You too.